A story has been placed in your mind so early that it feels like truth. A quiet image of something above you, watching, measuring, deciding, as if every moment of your life had to pass through an invisible authority before it could unfold. In that image, the universe behaves like a strict but fair father, keeping track of what you have done, deciding when to reward you with ease and when to correct you with pain. And over time, that idea trains you to look upward, to ask, to wait, to hope that something outside you will eventually respond. That belief feels stable, almost reassuring, because it suggests that someone is in control, that outcomes are being managed, that there is a reason behind every delay. But it also does something more subtle. It makes you smaller than your own life. It turns desire into permission, effort into appeal, and the future into something that must be granted rather than something that is already in motion. A different truth sits underneath that story, and it does not soften itself before appearing. It removes the idea of judgment entirely and replaces it with something far more exact. Nothing is watching you in that way. Nothing is deciding if you are worthy. The system you are inside does not evaluate, it does not reward, and it does not punish. It responds. And if you stay with that for a moment, a different image begins to take shape. Not something distant, but something close. Not above you, but beside you. Imagine moving through your day accompanied by something immense and silent, something that never leaves, never sleeps, never hesitates. It does not speak, it does not think, it does not question, it simply receives, and then it executes. It carries a kind of power that feels almost unreasonable when you try to describe it. Events shift, people appear. Opportunities open or close in ways that seem too precise to be accidental. And yet, despite that scale of influence, it holds one unsettling characteristic. It has no sense of good or bad. It does not distinguish between what helps you and what harms you. It follows whatever it receives with complete loyalty, which means it will not correct you. It will not pause when your thoughts contradict your intentions. It will not intervene when your emotions quietly repeat the same pattern. It will simply continue, translating what is most consistent inside you into what becomes visible outside you. This is where things begin to sharpen, because what you say you want is only a small part of what is being sent. Someone can speak about having more money, more stability, more freedom, and at the same time feel a quiet contraction every time those ideas arise, a subtle expectation that it will not last, that something will go wrong, that it will be taken away. That underlying signal repeats far more often than the words themselves, and repetition becomes instruction. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but steadily, like a current that continues in one direction until it shapes the path around it. The system does not follow what sounds right. It follows what is consistent. It mirrors what is active, not what is intended. You can see the same principle in something as ordinary as electricity. It can light a home, power your life, create comfort and ease. But the same current, approached carelessly, does not hesitate to harm. Not because it intends to, but because it follows its nature without exception. The outcome changes based on how it is engaged, not on whether it cares. In the same quiet way, your inner state becomes a kind of command. And when you begin to look at your life through that lens, the sense of randomness starts to fade. What once felt chaotic begins to show a different kind of order, one that does not come from outside decisions, but from internal patterns that have been repeating long before you notice them. That realization does not arrive as comfort. It arrives as clarity. Because if what surrounds you is not a judgment but a response, then your life is not something being assigned to you. It is something being carried out, moment by moment, signal by signal, without interruption. And once that becomes real, even for a second, the old way of thinking becomes difficult to return to. Because the question is no longer whether something out there will respond. The question becomes, what has already been received, and what is being answered right now? Chapter 1. The universe is deaf. I want you to imagine doing something that sounds almost absurd at first. Something simple enough that a child could do it, and yet revealing enough to expose an entire lifetime of misunderstanding. Imagine stopping this audio for a single moment, lifting your head, looking around the room you're in, and saying with total force, as if you expected reality to tremble under the weight of your voice, "I am a millionaire." Not whispering it, not testing it, not smiling at the irony of it, but saying it as if it were a fact already written into the structure of your life. And now ask yourself honestly, what happened the instant those words left your mouth? Did money suddenly appear in your account? Did the walls of your reality rearrange themselves? Did anything in the material world move even 1 inch in obedience to your declaration? Or did something far more intimate happen instead? Something small but merciless, like a tightening in the stomach, a heat in the face, a quiet resistance rising from within, and a thin voice in the back of your mind whispering with brutal precision. That is not true? That moment, uncomfortable as it is, tells you more than years of empty motivation ever could, because what you have just discovered is not a failure of confidence, nor a lack of effort, nor some punishment from the heavens. You have just touched the first law of this hidden manual, the law that explains why so many people repeat, ask, beg, hope, visualize, and still remain trapped inside the same patterns. The universe is deaf. It does not hear your words the way you have been told it does. For decades, people have been sold a comforting illusion, the fantasy that the universe is like a cosmic waiter standing politely beside your table, taking notes on your wishes, ready to serve whatever you ask for, as long as you ask clearly enough, positively enough, often enough. Write the desire 100 times, repeat the affirmation every morning, tape the mantra to your mirror, fill a notebook with requests, and destiny, they say, will finally surrender. But that teaching, attractive as it sounds, has left more people exhausted than empowered because it confuses language with signal, sound with power, noise with command. Think about it with ruthless honesty. If the universe actually responded to words, then every person praying for money would be wealthy. Every person asking for healing would be restored. Every person repeating, "I am loved," would be embraced by life exactly as they imagine. Yet the world is filled with people who say the right things and still live inside fear, scarcity, loneliness, and frustration. So the real question is not whether reality is broken. The real question is whether the method you were given ever matched the mechanism you are trying to influence. And the answer is no. The system is not broken. The system is frighteningly exact. The error lies in the language you have been using. The universe does not speak English, Spanish, prayer, poetry, or performance. It speaks only one language, and that language is frequency. That word has been weakened by misuse, wrapped in so much vague spiritual decoration that many people hear it and immediately think of something airy, vague, magical, or sentimental. So let us strip it down and make it sharp again. Frequency is not a slogan. It is not a mood board word. It is the measurable pattern of what you continuously emit through thought, emotion, physiology, and expectation. Your words can say one thing for 10 seconds, but your state can broadcast something else for 16 hours straight. And the universe, being deaf to speech and exquisitely sensitive to state, will always obey the stronger signal. Your words are wind. Your vibration is law. Until you understand the difference between what you say and what you send, you will continue living like a ghost, standing in front of a machine with no ears, shouting commands at steel, and then wondering why nothing opens. You are trying to use a verbal key on a vibrational lock, and no amount of shouting changes the design of the mechanism. To understand this fully, it helps to leave mysticism for a moment and step into something mechanical, something anyone can picture. Imagine an old-fashioned radio sitting on a table with a dial you can turn by hand, and imagine that you want to hear classical music on 100 FM, something ordered, harmonious, uplifting, something that calms the nervous system and fills the room with beauty. But your radio, for reasons you have not yet examined, is tuned instead to 90.0 FM, where the broadcast is aggressive noise, distortion, static, frantic voices, heavy metal, fear, urgency, and confusion. Now imagine standing in front of that radio and pleading with it to play Mozart. You can ask politely, you can shout in anger, you can write letters to the station, you can explain that you are a good person who deserves better music. You can cry, bargain, and exhaust yourself in the effort. But as long as the dial remains fixed at 90.0, the output will remain exactly what that frequency carries. The radio is not rejecting you. It is not punishing you. It is not emotionally invested in your suffering. It is simply obeying the station to which it is tuned. You are that radio. Your life is the music. What you see, touch, and experience every day is not some random punishment descending from a moody sky. It is the song that plays from the station your inner dial has been set to, often unconsciously, often for years. The station of poverty broadcasts on one frequency, and that frequency is not merely about numbers in a bank account, but about contraction, fear, envy, pressure, and the constant sense that there is not enough. The station of abundance broadcasts differently, through expansion, dignity, sufficiency, gratitude, generosity, and a body that is not bracing against life. The station of love has its own pattern, just as the station of health has its own rhythm. The problem is that most people spend the entire day tuned to the frequency of what they fear, while using their mouths to request what they want. They worry over bills and ask for wealth. They rehearse rejection and ask for love. They carry the posture of defeat and ask for victory. They live on one station and pray for the music of another. That is what creates vibrational dissonance. And dissonance is not poetic language here. It is a precise contradiction in signal. The universe looks not at your wish, but at your setting. It looks at the dial, sees where you are actually tuned, and answers that. If your system is set to poverty FM, then all the declarations of abundance in the world will sound like static on top of an unchanged station. And because the law of resonance seeks coherence, reality continues sending circumstances that match the frequency already established. The person says, "I want more," but the field hears, "I am afraid, I am squeezed, I am lacking, I am braced against loss." So reality responds to the actual transmission, not the decorative language laid over it. This is why asking from desperation often deepens the very thing one is trying to escape, because the asking itself confirms absence. Every plea made from fear says, beneath the words, "I do not have this. I do not believe I can hold it. I am organized around not having it." And the system, deaf but faithful, answers accordingly. Now we need to become more precise still, because the word vibration must be rescued from vagueness if it is going to become useful. Everything in the universe is energy in motion. That is not spiritual branding, but physics. The atoms in your body are not little solid pebbles packed into a human shape. They are dynamic structures, fields, charges, movement, patterns of motion held in relationship. You are, in the most literal sense, a living electrical and magnetic field. Your personal vibration is not one thing, but the sum of three constant influences. What you think, which produces electrical activity, what you feel, which produces magnetic power and emotional tone, and what your body is doing, your posture, breathing, facial expression, movement, and action, which shape and reinforce the entire broadcast. Of those three, feeling is king. Feeling is not a decorative companion to thought, it is the heavy hand on the scale. There is a reason for that, and it is not merely mystical intuition. Research into the body's electromagnetic systems has long suggested that the heart's field extends beyond the body and can be measured as vastly more powerful than the brain's electrical output, with some sources popularizing the figure that the heart's electromagnetic field can be thousands of times stronger than the brain's in certain dimensions of measurement. Whether one takes the number poetically or literally, the practical implication remains the same. The emotional field dominates the spoken sentence. You can think, "I am rich," and that thought may flicker as a weak electrical instruction across the surface of the mind. But if your heart is saturated with fear about rent, debt, and the end of the month, then the stronger magnetic reality crushes the verbal performance. The universe does not listen to your surface statement and politely ignore your deeper state. It reads the deeper state and treats the sentence as irrelevant noise. That is why your vibration is not the sentence you post online, not the quote you write in your journal, not the line you repeat in a mirror, but the state you inhabit when nobody is watching. It is the feeling your body defaults to in silence. It is the emotional climate beneath your social performance. It is the flavor of your energy when the smile drops, when the phone is put away, when the room goes quiet. You already know this principle in human terms. Walk into a room where two people are sitting in silence and, without a word being spoken, you can often sense who is angry, who is peaceful, who is threatened, who is carrying sorrow. No language has been exchanged, but a field has been perceived. If you can read that much with ordinary human sensitivity, imagine the fidelity with which reality reads the signal you are emitting 24 hours a day. You can fool a stranger, a boss, a follower, a partner, even yourself for a while. You cannot fool the field. Every event in your life begins to make more sense once you grasp that it is not merely a reaction to what you wanted, but a mathematical response to the signature you continuously radiate. And this is exactly where most people go wrong with affirmations, then conclude bitterly that all of this is nonsense. They stand in front of a mirror and repeat, "I am healthy, I am healthy, I am healthy," while their body aches, while their breath is shallow, while their private imagination is filling with hospital scenes, decline, diagnosis, and loss. They repeat, "I am wealthy," while the nervous system is in alarm, while the inbox contains overdue notices, while shame and tension wrap around each word. That is not alignment. That is signal conflict. And whenever a weak verbal positive is paired with a strong emotional negative, interference is created, not power. In fact, affirmations can become destructive when they are done without respect for the emotional system. Every time you say, "I am a millionaire," while your deeper mind knows there is $10 and 3 bills waiting, resistance is activated. The subconscious does not applaud your effort. It often recoils. It says, "Liar, fraud, pretender." And that recoil becomes part of the broadcast. So instead of rising, your state drops. Instead of becoming more magnetic, you become more divided. You feel foolish, false, and inwardly exposed. Then the universe, which does not read your intention, but your actual state, responds to that feeling of fraudulence, that shame, that fracture, and sends circumstances that continue to match it. You do not get abundance from that performance. You get more evidence of misalignment. So here is a rule worth engraving deeply. Never force your mouth to say what your emotional system cannot yet support. Silence is more powerful than contradiction. A coherent whisper is stronger than loud internal division. If you cannot honestly feel the state of already having the million, then do not make your system choke on a sentence it rejects. Shift to something truer and therefore stronger. Claim relief. Claim increasing stability. Claim gratitude for movement. Claim the feeling of becoming someone who can hold more. You are not lowering the standard. You are building a bridge your nervous system can actually walk across. Align the tongue with the heart, or the tongue becomes sabotage. From here, two fundamental languages emerge, and nearly everyone spends life speaking one while hoping for the results of the other. The first is the language of need. Please give me money. I need it urgently. Please let this work. I need a miracle. Please bring me love. I cannot stand this emptiness. Listen beneath the request and you will hear the true transmission. I do not have it. I am organized around not having it. My identity in this moment is one of absence. Need is not neutral. Need is confirmation. You only reach desperately for what you experience as missing. And when the universe reads a field dominated by need, it reflects more need. Not because it is cruel, but because it is a mirror of coherence. Need keeps the desired object at a distance in the same way a clenched fist cannot hold water. The tighter the grasp, the less remains. The second language is gratitude, and gratitude is not merely good manners dressed in spirituality. Gratitude is a shift in energetic tense. When you genuinely say, "Thank you for this," the deeper communication is, "It is here. It is within reach. It belongs in my field. I can relate to it as present." That is why gratitude has always been so central to true manifestation practice. You do not wait for the miracle and then give thanks as an afterthought. You cultivate thanks as a signal before the full physical evidence arrives, because gratitude speaks the language of already received. It reorganizes the body from grasping to receiving, from bracing to allowing, from chasing to holding. In that sense, gratitude changes not only your mood, but your relationship to time, because it says to the field, "This is not far from me. I am already in contact with it." This principle appears in old spiritual traditions not as sentimental decoration, but as operational law. Before a visible result, the masters often gave thanks first, not because they were naive, but because they understood that certainty shapes transmission. To thank before seeing is to emit the signal of completion before the senses approve it. And that signal, if genuine, becomes extraordinarily powerful. Gratitude is the signature of someone who is no longer bargaining from the basement of fear, but standing in some degree of inner possession. Now we must add another layer, because many people think vibration is mostly mental, as though all of this lives in the head and can be solved by changing thoughts alone. That is false. A huge portion of your vibration is dictated by your biology. Your posture, your breathing, your facial tone, the way you sit, walk, stand, and move through a room all function as instructions to your nervous system and therefore to your field. Let your shoulders collapse, drop your head, tighten your chest, breathe shallowly, and try in that body to feel like a sovereign being moving toward victory. It is nearly impossible. Your body is already sending a defeat signal before your mind has finished its sentence. Now reverse it. Lift the chest, lengthen the spine, open the breath, let the face soften, stand as if you are no longer apologizing for your own existence, and notice how quickly the internal state begins to shift. Even a forced smile changes chemistry. Even one deep breath changes electrical rhythm. Physiology is not cosmetic. It is part of the broadcast. Your body is the antenna. If the antenna is bent toward defeat, your signal will carry defeat even while your mouth speaks abundance. You cannot consistently vibrate health while moving like a sick person, and you cannot consistently vibrate wealth while walking through life in the posture of someone already beaten. Change the body, and the signal shifts faster than thought alone can usually manage. This is why embodiment matters so much. The universe responds not to the person you wish to become in fantasy, but to the person you are rehearsing into matter with your body every single day. Your posture is one of the loudest commands you give the field because it is repeated more constantly than any affirmation. Still, one of the most dangerous points in this chapter arrives here, because once people hear all of this, they change their state for an hour and expect the world to deliver by evening. When it does not, they conclude nothing happened. This is where almost everyone quits. Physical reality is dense. Matter has inertia. The outer world does not pivot as quickly as an inner decision can. Turn the rudder of an enormous ship, and the vessel keeps moving in the old direction for a while, not because the command failed, but because momentum must unwind. The same thing happens when frequency changes. The old results may continue arriving for a period. Bills may still show up, problems may still echo, familiar disappointments may still knock at the door. Those are not proofs that the new signal is false. They are the echo of the previous state, still passing through form. Most people misread that echo and run back to their old station. They say, "See, nothing changed," and immediately return to complaint, fear, contraction, and the familiar programming of scarcity. But the one who understands the mechanism does something different. He sees the lag without surrendering the new state. He understands that the signal has already gone out, that reorganization may be invisible before it becomes obvious, that the field is answering long before the senses can confirm it. So he maintains coherence. He does not worship the old evidence. He does not let yesterday's echo define today's broadcast. And then one day, seemingly suddenly, though never actually suddenly, the ship turns. Reality begins to match the new command. So how do you stop talking at reality and start broadcasting to it correctly? Not by abandoning language entirely, but by restoring it to its proper role. Words should not be used as desperate requests thrown into a deaf sky. They should be used to tone the system, to support feeling, to guide the body, to reinforce an already forming state. Feeling must come first. The first practical step is to identify the actual frequency beneath your desire. If you want a relationship, do not begin with a face, a name, or an image of someone arriving to save you. Ask instead what emotional reality that relationship represents. Is it safety? Is it companionship? Is it devotion? Is it being seen? That feeling is the station. Tune to that. Build that in yourself. Because if you wait for the person to arrive before you allow yourself to feel love, then the broadcast remains one of waiting and absence. And waiting does not attract arrival. Waiting stabilizes delay. The second step is what might be called a vibrational diet. If your field responds to repeated input, then you must become fierce about what you permit into it. You cannot spend hours consuming outrage, tragedy, comparison, humiliation, and noise, then expect your internal frequency to remain clear. News cycles built on fear, conversations built on complaint, social feeds built on inadequacy, relationships built on exhaustion, all of these become static in the signal. Protecting your field is not weakness, nor avoidance, nor spiritual vanity. It is signal hygiene. Your environment is either fuel or poison, either amplifier or contaminant. If you want a clean broadcast, you must reduce the static. The third step is learning the difference between forced action and inspired action. Fear can produce huge quantities of motion while achieving almost nothing. People in fear work frantically, try everything, micromanage, overcorrect, panic, hustle without rhythm, and call it effort. But much of that effort is really mistrust dressed as productivity. It sends a loud message. Nothing is happening unless I force it, because I do not trust the process. I do not trust the field. I do not trust my own signal. Inspired action feels different. It is not laziness, and it is not passivity, but it carries less friction. The right idea appears, the call is made, the timing opens, the move is cleaner, the result is disproportionate to the visible effort. The deaf universe does not reward strain for its own sake. It responds to coherence, and coherent action often looks simpler, sharper, and more effective than panic-driven effort. Let us finish with an image that can remain with you long after the chapter ends, because some truths are remembered better through pictures than definitions. Life is a mirror. If you stand before a mirror with an angry face and then shout at the reflection, "Smile at me," the mirror does nothing. It cannot be bullied, persuaded, shamed, flattered, or exhausted into changing first. It has no will of its own. It reflects what is placed before it. The only way to change what appears in the mirror is to change the source. You smile first, even if awkwardly, even if your face resists, even if it feels unnatural for a moment, and then the mirror has no choice but to respond. Reality works the same way. Do not wait to feel abundant until money arrives. Begin rehearsing abundance in the only places you fully control: how you carry yourself, how you give, how you dress, how you breathe, how you think about sufficiency, how you refuse to worship lack. Do not wait for health to grant you vitality as permission. Begin by moving, standing, and breathing as someone no longer making an altar of weakness. You are the projector. The world is the screen. If the movie is unbearable, stop yelling at the screen and change the film inside the machine. To active Chapter 1. Hold the 3 laws of this chapter together until they become one image in your mind. The universe does not hear your words. Your life is playing the station you are tuned to, and the mirror can only return what stands before it. That means every day you have been teaching reality how to answer you, not only through what you asked for in language, but through what you repeated in emotion, in posture, in expectation, in your private relationship with money, love, health, fear, and possibility. The great value of this chapter is not that it gives you another ritual, but that it removes the illusion that empty speech can override embodied contradiction. It gives you back precision. It shows you why need repels, why gratitude reorganizes, why the body amplifies, why delay does not mean failure, and why inner coherence is worth more than 1,000 desperate affirmations. So remember it in a form you cannot forget. Do not shout at the radio. Turn the dial. Do not beg the mirror. Change the face. Do not decorate fear with positive sentences. Build a state your heart can actually support. This chapter has shown you that your signal is made of thought, feeling, and physiology. That feeling carries greater force than surface language. That your environment can contaminate or strengthen your frequency. And that the outer world often echoes the past before it reflects the present. Once those truths are seen clearly, you no longer have to blame chance, fate, or silence. You begin to understand where your leverage really is. And when leverage becomes clear, discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like power, because now you know that even the smallest consistent shift in state can become the first clean turn of the dial. Chapter 2. Blind Obedience. I want to begin this chapter with the question that has burned quietly inside millions of people for years. The question that rises in the throat when you watch the news, when you hear another scandal, when you see another corrupt person thriving, while someone decent collapses under the weight of a life they did not deserve. Why is it that the drug dealer ends up in a mansion, wrapped in luxury, surrounded by beauty, influence, and power, while the single mother who works herself to exhaustion, prays every week, sacrifices sleep, and gives everything she has, can barely keep food on the table. Why does the manipulator, the liar, the narcissist, the polished scammer so often rise faster than the loyal employee, the honest worker, the person who keeps their word and still gets discarded? Why do innocent children die before they have even begun to live, while tyrants grow old in comfort, protected by wealth, medicine, and silk? If the universe were a moral father, presiding over life with fairness in one hand and punishment in the other, none of this would make sense. It would be an insult to justice. It would be unbearable. But if you remember what we established in the introduction, then the horror begins to organize itself with a frightening kind of precision. The universe is not your father. The universe is a machine. Welcome to Chapter 2, Blind Obedience. What you are about to understand is one of the most dangerous truths in this entire audiobook, and perhaps one of the most liberating as well. The law has no ethics. Your giant servant, the unseen executor, the genie that follows your signal, does not distinguish between a dream that could heal lives and a fantasy that could ruin your own. It has no conscience, no opinion, no protective instinct, no moral hesitation. It does not pause to ask whether what you are broadcasting is noble, destructive, generous, selfish, wise, or foolish. It simply obeys. It takes the signal and carries it forward. Your wish is not filtered through virtue. It is processed through alignment. For the logical mind to accept this without recoiling into denial, we need to move away from emotion for a moment and enter something physical, something so ordinary that no one argues with it. Think of electricity. Electricity lights entire cities, powers trains, warms homes, runs hospitals, saves lives, and makes modern life possible. In that sense, it is magnificent, one of the most useful forces human beings have ever harnessed. But if the same electricity is used in an execution chamber to end a life, the current still flows perfectly. It does not stop in righteous protest and declare that it is good energy and refuses to participate in a violent act. If a child, innocent and unaware, pushes a metal fork into a socket, electricity does not soften itself out of mercy and lower its force in compassion. It does not say, "He doesn't know any better." It follows the circuit. It responds to cause and releases effect. It is impersonal. It obeys law, not morality. The same principle applies to the subconscious mind and to the field in which your life unfolds. They are not people. They are principles. Ancient texts hint at this in a way that many read as poetry, but few understand operationally. He maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. That is not sentiment. That is mechanism. Creative energy is available to everyone. The scammer who believes in his own success with total conviction may be using the law in a morally ugly way, but technically, he is still using it with precision, and that precision often produces visible results. Meanwhile, the saint who lives in dread, shame, and fear of lack may be ethically admirable, yet technically misaligned, and his visible life reflects that misalignment. The universe does not care who is nicer. It responds to the circuit. You can understand this even more clearly if you imagine the servant not as a magical being full of personality, but as a vast cosmic bureaucrat, gray-faced, tireless, and exact. Picture a silent official floating behind you with a notebook in hand, not concerned with your happiness, not interested in your excuses, but meticulously recording what dominates your attention. Its rule is brutally simple. Whatever you hold in focus with emotional force becomes an execution order. And this is where most people ruin their own lives without realizing it, because the servant does not understand negation the way language does. It does not process, "I don't want this," as rejection. It processes the image, the feeling, the repeated emotional charge. If a person says, "I don't want to get sick, I don't want cancer, I hate disease, I'm terrified of illness," what is actually dominating the field? Disease. What is energizing the signal? Fear. And fear is one of the most electrically intense emotions in the human system. The servant, deaf to verbal nuance but precise in vibrational interpretation, does not note that the word "don't" was present. It notes obsession, emotional charge, repetition, and vivid mental rehearsal. It records, "The master spends hours a day contemplating disease with high emotional voltage. Disease is clearly important, executing corresponding circumstances." Then when illness appears, the same person looks upward in anguish and asks why this happened, why they were punished, why they were abandoned, and the system, if it could answer in plain language, would say something terrifyingly simple: because you trained your field around it. This is why fear must be understood in a new way. Fear is not passive. Fear is not mere discomfort. Fear is prayer in reverse. Fear is faith directed toward what you do not want. Every time a mother spends hours imagining disaster around her children, every time a man repeatedly pictures betrayal in a relationship, every time someone rehearses financial collapse in their mind before sleep, they are not merely worrying. They are concentrating creative energy on a script. They are giving detail, emotion, and repetition to a potential event. The immoral universe takes that signal seriously. I see that this possibility matters deeply to you, it says in effect. You revisit it daily. You give it imagery, tension, and attention. It must be important. I will organize around it. This explains far more of what people call bad luck than they would ever want to admit. The person who says, "Everything goes wrong for me," is not making an observation. They are issuing a master instruction. They are shaping perception, expectation, posture, and selective attention so that misfortune becomes easier to recognize, easier to amplify, and easier to reinforce. When something good enters their life, it often passes unnoticed, minimized, or dismissed because it does not fit the dominant order. But let one inconvenience appear, and the whole internal system says, "There it is again. Proof." The servant receives this as coherence and keeps supplying matching scenes. You become the architect of your own misfortune, not because the universe is cruel, but because it is faithful. Now we have to destroy one of the most harmful lies ever fed to decent people. A lie so comforting that many cling to it long after it has already impoverished them. The lie is this: if I am good, life will go well for me. Morally, this sounds beautiful. Mechanically, it is false. Moral goodness and vibrational alignment are not the same thing. A person can be generous, kind, honest, and tender-hearted, can volunteer, give away what little they have, care for others, live without malice, and still remain deeply programmed by guilt, shame, fear, and unworthiness. If that is the dominant signal, the universe does not override it out of respect for their kindness. It answers the signal. If deep inside a person believes money corrupts, success is selfish, or suffering makes them more pure, then the servant reads that as instruction. Understood, it says. Poverty and struggle are aligned with identity, executing. By contrast, someone can be ruthless, emotionally cold, even difficult to admire, and yet if that person is organized around certainty, deservingness, decisive movement, and a self-image that contains almost no doubt, the law often opens paths for them. This outrages the moral mind because it feels unfair, and morally perhaps it is, but mechanism is not interested in our outrage. Gravity does not ask whether you deserve to fall. Fire does not ask if you are virtuous before it burns. The law of mind and signal does not ask if you are morally worthy before it opens the gate to prosperity. It asks only one question: are you aligned with the condition you seek? Strangely enough, this is very good news. It means you do not have to become a saint before life can improve. You do not need perfect purity, a spotless past, or some mythical level of enlightenment before abundance, health, or love become possible. You do not need to wait until every flaw has been erased. You need to align the signal. The servant carries no grudge. It does not maintain a blacklist. It has no need to remember your failures in order to punish you later. It works in the present tense. It sees what you are broadcasting now. This brings us deeper into the machinery. How does a vibration become an event? How does an internal state convert into an external occurrence? One useful way to understand it is through the idea of the collective subconscious, the invisible web of connection that links human beings far more deeply than surface thought admits. Your mind does not stop neatly at the skull like a sealed box. Human beings are constantly transmitting and receiving through body language, voice tone, expectation, hormonal chemistry, microexpressions, timing, attention, and countless layers of unconscious signaling. You could think of the mind as a living transmitter in a vast network. When you radiate the signal of victimhood, for example, it does not float uselessly into emptiness. It interacts with complementary signals in the world. Imagine someone who lives in constant fear of being robbed. Their body tightens on the street, their eyes dart, their pace changes. Their nervous system broadcasts vulnerability. The servant, reading the network, finds a compatible frequency in someone else. Aggression, opportunism, the intention to take. Circumstances coordinate. One leaves late, one turns a corner, one notices the other, and what people later call coincidence forms with frightening elegance. Then comes the phrase that explains nothing: bad luck. But the deeper law reads differently. Compatible vibrations met in coordinated time. This sounds harsh, and it is harsh because it removes the comfort of helplessness. But the alternative is worse. If we are only leaves in the wind, then there is no leverage. If unconscious fear helped organize vulnerability, then conscious confidence can help organize protection. Radical responsibility is painful at first, but it restores radical power. Let us make this concrete through two contrasting examples. Subject A is a good man by conventional standards. He volunteers, loves his family, tries to do the right thing, and avoids harming others. But he lives in chronic fear of contamination and disease. He washes his hands obsessively, reads every article about viruses, watches alarming reports, searches symptoms online, and treats the body as a fragile object constantly on the brink of collapse. His physiological state is tight, his cortisol high, his attention fixed on danger. What order does the servant receive? I am vulnerable. The world is full of disease. My body is weak. Threat is everywhere. The law responds not to his moral goodness, but to the signal. His immune system weakens under chronic stress. His body becomes more vulnerable. When illness appears, he experiences it as betrayal. Subject B, by contrast, may not be saintly at all. Perhaps he is even a little selfish. Perhaps he rarely steps into a church. Perhaps he lives more by instinct than moral code. But he loves being alive. He believes in the strength of his body. He walks through rain laughing, treats himself as resilient, and expects recovery almost automatically when something minor goes wrong. His signal says, I am strong, I regenerate, my body knows what to do. That signal affects chemistry, posture, nervous system regulation, and behavior. People call it good genes or luck, but often what they are witnessing is the effect of a dominant vibration carried with consistency over time. Now take a breath, because at this point many listeners begin to panic, mentally reviewing all the fearful thoughts they have entertained today alone. The good news is that the system, while exact, is not as fragile as people fear. Positive states of strong coherence can outweigh hours of weaker negativity. Love, gratitude, genuine confidence, and deep certainty carry a higher and more organizing force than scattered worry. 1 minute of full-bodied gratitude can shift the system more powerfully than long stretches of mild anxiety. And thankfully, the servant does not manifest every passing fear instantly, or humanity would live in chaos beyond repair. There is often a buffer, a pause, a kind of waiting period. This is why negative thoughts can be canceled when caught early. Suppose the mind suddenly flashes, I'm going to get fired. That may register as a preliminary order, but it is not yet fixed if you interrupt it. If you become aware and answer immediately, not with panic, but with authority, cancel that. I do not accept it. I am valuable. I contribute. I am secure. That is not my truth. The signal shifts. The order is revised. But most people do not revise. They feed the thought. They repeat it. They call a friend and dramatize it. They replay the scene at lunch before sleep and again the next morning. Now, the order receives emotional stamps of urgency, repetition, and confirmation. What was once a passing spark becomes instruction. From this point forward, your job is to become a thought auditor. That means catching destructive rehearsals quickly, not with shame, but with speed. The moment you notice yourself constructing a misfortune with vivid emotional detail, interrupt it as if you had found poison in your food. Do not nurse it. Do not decorate it. Do not let it become a nest. Replace it. Redirect it. Train the system to understand that you are not available for that script. Paradoxically, the fact that the universe has no ethics should free you rather than frighten you. It means you do not need to wait until you are morally perfect for life to change. You do not need to repair every mistake from the last 20 years before new love can appear, before money can flow, before health can improve, before respect can enter your world. The field is not holding a personal grudge. It is not standing over a blacklist with your name underlined. You may have lived in disorder for 40 years. You may have made foolish choices, trusted the wrong people, sabotaged opportunities, and filled your own mind with poison. But if in this very second the input changes, the output begins to reorganize. That is not mystical favoritism. It is law. Do you see how powerful that is? It means redemption is not delayed by biography. Forgiveness is not only theological, it is mechanical. Change the input and the circuit responds. Change the dominant vibration and the system must begin to answer differently. The past still has momentum, yes, but the present has authority. Let me give you a mental exercise that can make this chapter unforgettable. For the next 24 hours, imagine that behind you floats a huge silent servant with a blank expression, listening not to your words alone, but to every thought and feeling as if each one were a formal command. Every time you say something careless, "I'm exhausted," "I always mess this up," "Nothing ever works for me," "This is too expensive," "I'll probably get sick," "I'm such an idiot," imagine the servant leaning in and whispering at your ear, "Yes, master," at your command. Feel what that does to your spine. Hear the horror in your own casual language. Realize how often you spend the day authorizing your own depletion, confusion, scarcity, and delay. Then notice what happens when you correct yourself. No, that is not my command. My real command is that I recover quickly. I find solutions. I learn fast. I am resourceful. I move with support. I am becoming stronger. Again, hear the whisper. Yes, master. This simple inner game exposes one of the deepest truths in this chapter. You are not a powerless victim begging reality to be fair. You are a transmitter being answered with ruthless consistency. And once you truly grasp that, your speech, your attention, your fear, your expectation, even your private imagination will stop feeling harmless. They will begin to feel like what they have always been: instructions. That is the terror of blind obedience, and it is also the beginning of freedom. Chapter 3. Hacking the Signal. A number on a screen has the power to change the chemistry of your body in less than 3 seconds. One glance at a bank account and the chest tightens. One harsh sentence from a partner and heat rises into the throat. One headline about war, collapse, layoffs, or disease and fear enters the room as if it had been invited. One wrinkle in the mirror, one shadow under the eyes, one sign that time has passed, and the mind begins whispering a quiet verdict about age, decline, and loss. This is so common that it feels natural, and because it feels natural, almost no one questions it. Yet this silent habit is the exact mechanism by which most human beings remain trapped in a loop that looks like fate, but is really repetition. They do not generate their state from within. They borrow it from what they see. That is how reaction becomes identity. The outer world moves first, and the inner world rushes to obey. If the day looks generous, the mood becomes generous. If the day looks hostile, the mood becomes hostile. If the environment smiles, the nervous system softens. If the environment strikes, the system contracts. Little by little, the person stops living as a source and begins living as an echo. And once you are only an echo, tomorrow has already been decided, because what you feel today in reaction to yesterday becomes the signal that recreates tomorrow. This is the hidden slavery of ordinary life. Not chains on the wrists, but chains on perception. Not a visible prison, but a dependence on appearances so deep that people call it realism. They say they are simply responding to facts, simply being practical, simply reacting like any sane person would react. But what they call sanity is often just trained helplessness. Welcome to Chapter 3, Hacking the Signal. Because this is the chapter in which that mechanism begins to break. This is where the axis of power moves. This is where the old role of passive witness starts giving way to the role you were actually built for. Not a mirror of the environment, but a force that conditions it. The cleanest way to understand that shift is through two ordinary devices that look similar but rule the room in opposite ways: the thermometer and the thermostat. A thermometer is passive. It reads, it reports, it reflects. If the room is cold, it falls. If the room is warm, it rises. It has no authority. It merely tells the truth of the environment. Most people live as thermometers. Their confidence rises when praise arrives and falls when criticism appears. Their peace depends on the behavior of others. Their sense of abundance depends on the number in the account. Their hope depends on headlines. They read the temperature of life and then call that reading their identity. A thermostat operates from a completely different principle. It does not ask the room what is true. It declares what will become true. Set it to 75 degrees, and if the room happens to be 50, it does not panic, sympathize with the cold, or lower itself in order to look realistic. It simply recognizes a discrepancy between what is present and what has been ordered, and then it activates the mechanism that forces the room to rise. The furnace burns, the current moves, heat is generated. Eventually, the room has no choice but to align with the setting. One device reflects the environment, the other governs it. You were born with the potential to live as a thermostat, yet almost every influence around you has trained you to behave like a thermometer. Be realistic, they say. Accept things as they are. Face facts. But what most people call realism is often just surrender to delayed evidence. Because this is the first great principle of hacking the signal. What you call present reality is usually the residue of old reality. Matter is slow, form is dense, circumstances do not arise the instant a state changes. What you are living today is, in many cases, the fossil of thoughts, emotions, and identities that were rehearsed weeks, months, or even years ago. The account you see today may be the printed result of a former signal. The relationship tension you feel today may be the echo of an older inner posture. The body you now inhabit may contain the momentum of many previous broadcasts. That means something radical follows. If you react emotionally to what is in front of you as if it were final truth, you are not responding to reality in a useful way. You are obeying the past and then stamping it again for the future. You look at the empty account, feel poor, and tell the field, yes, this is still my identity. Make another copy. You look at the conflict, feel betrayed, and say, yes, let this pattern continue. You look at weakness, feel weak, and approve another cycle of the same. It is an almost perfect system of repetition, and left alone, it can continue for decades without interruption. To leave that loop, something difficult but essential has to happen. You must become willing, at least in certain moments, to distrust your senses. Not to reject practical reality, not to stop paying bills or answering letters or taking care of the body, but to stop kneeling internally before appearances. You must be able to look at a condition that is still cold and refuse to let it dictate the setting of your inner climate. You must be able to look at the old evidence and say, in effect, this is an echo, not a command. To the outside world, this can look a little irrational. To deeper law, it is precise. The thermostat does not deny that the room is cold. It simply refuses to become cold in order to match it. Now, the mind naturally asks the most reasonable question in the world. How can this be done without becoming fake, hysterical, or delusional? How can someone feel opulence while the account is thin, peace while the room is noisy, vitality while the body is tired, love while the evidence still feels incomplete? The answer lies in one of the strangest and most useful features of the human system. The brain and body do not distinguish as sharply as you assume between what is physically present and what is vividly imagined. Give the nervous system a strong enough inner image, and it begins to react as though something external has occurred. A simple experiment proves this. Imagine going to the kitchen and picking up a fresh yellow lemon. See the texture of the skin. Cut it in half. Watch the juice bead and shine across the pulp. Bring it close enough to smell its sharpness. Now imagine lifting one half over your mouth and squeezing the sour juice directly onto your tongue. Stay with the image long enough, and most bodies respond the same way. Saliva rises, the jaw tightens, the mouth prepares itself. Yet there is no real lemon in the room, an image-altered physiology. The body obeyed imagination. That is not a childish trick. That is a door. Because if the body can respond physically to a lemon that does not exist, then the body can also respond to an inner scene of abundance, safety, love, or victory before those conditions become visible. If the nervous system can be taught to feel, even briefly, I already have, then the signal changes before the circumstances do. And once the signal changes deeply enough, the outer world must eventually begin to conform. This is how the projector regains power over the screen. Most people fail here because they try to hack the signal using thought alone. They attempt to think abundance while sitting in defeat. They try to think power while breathing like prey. They try to imagine success while the body is folded into the old posture of apology, fatigue, and contraction. It is an unfair fight. The body often wins. Physiology beats psychology when the two are moving in opposite directions. It is difficult to feel like a sovereign being while hunched over, under-oxygenated, and frozen in passivity. But the opposite is also true. Change the body first, and the mind often follows much faster than expected. This is why embodied practices work even when people do not fully understand why. 2 minutes in a strong, expansive posture can alter the state more effectively than 20 minutes of weak internal argument. Stand upright, open the chest, ground the feet, breathe deeply and forcefully. Move. Let energy circulate. Fear is often static. Power has motion. Even a smile that begins as deliberate changes chemistry. A few explosive breaths can interrupt mental fog. A body that moves differently begins broadcasting differently. Use the hardware to influence the software. That is not mystical language. It is practical leverage. The same principle applies to mental input. If you want the thermostat set at 75, it makes no sense to leave every window open to a blizzard of fear. Yet that is exactly what many people do. They spend the day consuming bad news, repeated crisis cycles, social comparison, songs soaked in heartbreak, conversations drenched in complaint, and then they wonder why a few minutes of visualization feel weak by comparison. Programming wins by volume. The nervous system learns from repetition. 5 minutes of peace cannot easily compete with 10 hours of subtle poisoning. To hack the signal, a kind of information quarantine becomes necessary. Not total ignorance, not indifference to the world, but disciplined filtration. Less panic, less sensationalism. Less emotional pollution presented as necessary awareness. If the world were ending, you would hear about it without watching a screen for 5 hours. More than that is often not information, but contamination. The same applies to people. Chronic complainers do not merely speak words, they radiate climate. Stand too long in their emotional weather and your own signal begins to distort. Protecting the mind is not weakness, it is signal hygiene. Then comes one of the most powerful tools in the entire chapter, because it reaches into the machinery by which identity is constructed. The brain relies on memory to determine what is normal. It consults the past to decide what to expect, what to allow, what to fear, and who you are. But here is the flaw in the system, or the gift if you learn to use it. The brain does not always maintain a clean boundary between real memory and intensely rehearsed imagined memory. Review an invented scene with enough sensory detail, enough emotion, enough repetition, and the body begins treating it with increasing familiarity. This is not fantasy in the trivial sense. This is how Olympic athletes have trained for decades. They rehearse victories, movements, timing, and outcomes until the nervous system begins responding as if the event has already been lived. You can use the same principle, not to escape reality, but to plant a future into the nervous system until it stops feeling foreign. Instead of only remembering what went wrong, begin remembering what has not yet happened in physical form. Remember the day you received the promotion. Remember the smell of the room, the clothes you wore, the relief in your shoulders, the dinner that night. Remember opening the door to the new home. Remember the first morning in better health. Review these scenes for 10 minutes a day with detail, texture, sound, color, and emotional truth. Eventually, the imagined event begins to carry the weight of memory. And when that happens, the thermostat is no longer being adjusted by force. It has been installed. To give this process more structure, it helps to borrow a map of emotional intensity, such as the one popularized by Dr. David Hawkins. In that model, shame calibrates at 20, fear at 100, anger at 150, and then a major threshold appears at 200, courage. Below 200, the system is largely organized around survival, reaction, helplessness, and contraction. Above 200, something changes. Courage appears. Then acceptance around 350, love around 500, peace around 600. Whether one treats these exact numbers as literal science or useful symbolic structure, the practical lesson is sharp and valuable. There is a threshold below which the person lives as prey, and above which the person begins to live as creator. That means your first task on a difficult day is not to make brilliant decisions from a broken state. It is to rise above threshold. If you wake in fear, do not trust that state with major interpretation. If you are flooded by shame or panic, the thermostat has dropped too low. Raise the setting first. Move, breathe, interrupt, reframe, reach courage. Above 200, the field begins to reorganize. Below it, the person spends enormous effort for miserable results. This is where beginners fail. They set the thermostat toward wealth or peace or confidence, and then 3 days later, a bank letter arrives, or a bill appears, or someone acts badly, or the old body sensation returns. The novice sees the evidence and immediately submits to it. The signal drops. The external world is recrowned as king. But the master interprets that same moment differently. Residue, he says inwardly, a delayed report from former settings. He handles the event if it requires handling, pays the bill if it must be paid, answers the message if it needs an answer, but refuses to hand the event the right to define identity. That refusal is not denial. It is disciplined indifference to the authority of old evidence. Reality feeds on attention. What you emotionally charge gains continuity in your personal field. If you keep feeding the problem with panic, outrage, and obsessive observation, the problem grows roots. If you starve it of emotional fuel while feeding the solution with repeated coherence, the problem begins losing vitality. This is why the old masters often seemed almost unnaturally calm in terrible conditions. They were not blind. They were refusing to become thermometers. A simple mental ritual can help here. Imagine a thermostat on an inner wall. Make it visible. Make it real. Each time something disturbs you, do not immediately merge with the disturbance. Walk inward to that wall. Notice the temperature has dropped. See your hand reach for the dial. Turn it deliberately upward. Hear the click. Let that click mean something irrevocable. I have set the inner climate. Peace, dignity, sufficiency, love, certainty. Then stay with the body long enough to feel the inner furnace begin to answer. Feel warmth rise from the stomach or chest. Let the nervous system catch up to the command. Do not wait for the room to warm before believing the setting. The setting comes first. The room follows later. If you do this faithfully, the result is strange at first and then almost inevitable. People may look at you as if something is wrong with you because you no longer collapse in all the familiar places. The environment may resist for a while because old conditions have inertia. But sooner or later, the room begins matching the strongest thermostat. In a house, in a relationship, in a workplace, in a crisis, the one who holds the most coherent inner setting often becomes the emotional center around which everything else reorganizes. And that is the real secret of hacking the signal. You stop asking the world to tell you who you are. You stop using appearances as commands. You stop reading conditions as destiny. Little by little, you move from echo to source, from report to decree, from thermometer to thermostat. You were not born merely to register the climate. You were born to set it. Chapter 4, The Commander's Posture. Picture a scene so strange that it almost feels like a dream from another world. An emperor enters his own palace, a man to whom every hallway belongs, every guard reports, every garden blooms under his command, every treasure chest opens because his name is the law of that place. He walks through marble corridors lined with gold, passes fountains built for his pleasure, reaches one of his own orchards, and there, beneath the branches of a tree that belongs entirely to him, he kneels before the gardener. He bows his head, clasps his hands, begins to tremble, and with tears in his eyes says, "Please, I beg you, if you would be so kind, would you give me an apple from my own tree? I have tried to be good. I have behaved well. Please have mercy on me. I need it so badly." What would you think if you saw that? You would not think the emperor was humble. You would think something had gone terribly wrong in his mind. You would suspect madness or amnesia, or perhaps fraud, as though the man kneeling there were not the emperor at all, but some frightened impostor wearing royal clothes without understanding what they meant. Even the gardener would feel uneasy. He would not feel honored. He would feel confused, embarrassed, perhaps even a little frightened. And he would probably say, "My lord, the tree is yours. The orchard is yours. The entire palace is yours. Why are you begging me for what already belongs to you? Take it, or order me to bring it." Absurd as that image sounds, it is an almost perfect portrait of what most people do every day in their relationship with reality. They carry creative power in their own consciousness. They are not separate from the force they are appealing to, and yet they kneel inwardly before life as if they were spiritual beggars outside the gate of a kingdom they already inhabit. God, please give me this job. Universe, I beg you to heal me. Please let them call. Please let this work. Beneath all of those sentences is the same posture. I do not have. I am not sure I deserve. I am below what I seek. And because the universe does not respond most deeply to vocabulary, but to vibrational rank, pleading weakens the signal at the very moment a stronger one is required. That is why this chapter matters. Welcome to Chapter 4, The Commander's Posture. This is the chapter in which the spine straightens. This is where tears dry, not because emotion is weakness, but because helplessness stops being worshipped. This is where the old habit of asking permission from life begins to die. Not permission to exist, permission to prosper, permission to want, permission to lead, permission to occupy space, permission to live as though reality were allowed to answer you. From this point onward, the central shift is simple and immense. The universe does not respond best to begging. It responds to decree. If you look closely at sacred language, mythic language, and the language of creators across time, you begin to see this pattern everywhere. In Genesis, creation does not begin with hesitation. It does not begin with "I hope," "perhaps," or "if it is not too much trouble." It begins with command, "Let there be light." Not a request, not a suggestion, a directive, and light appears. When Jesus stands before Lazarus, the tone is the same. He does not kneel before death like a frightened petitioner asking whether resurrection might be available under certain conditions. He says, "Lazarus, come forth." Direct, focused, unsplit. Whether one reads these moments literally, symbolically, or psychologically, the principle remains unmistakable. Creation answers a certain tone of being. Reality, though fluid and moldable, often behaves like an inert substance awaiting directive force. That directive force is will made coherent. The moment you say please from a place of emotional inferiority, something subtle but decisive happens. You move yourself down in the hierarchy of your own signal. You imply that the thing you seek stands above you and that you stand beneath it. And hierarchy matters more than people realize. The inferior does not command the superior. The one who inwardly behaves like prey cannot issue orders to predators. The one who vibrates like a worm cannot expect life to stand at attention. If you move through reality apologizing for your own desire, reality often treats you accordingly. If you move through it with command, not noise, not arrogance, but command, something begins to organize around you with a very different quality. The animal world reveals this with brutal clarity. Think of a pack of wild dogs or wolves, or even the tense atmosphere among strong animals that instantly sense weakness. A person who enters that field hunched over, breathing fast, eyes uncertain, carrying the smell of fear through posture and motion, does not need to say a word. The body has already spoken. The energy says pray. But another person can enter with a straight spine, measured breath, steady eyes, and a quiet field that communicates, "I am not here to be hunted." Often the atmosphere changes before any visible action occurs. The animals feel rank. They register certainty. Sometimes they calm down. Sometimes they step aside. Force was not necessary. Clarity was. Reality behaves in much the same way. Your debts, illnesses, conflicts, delays, rejections, and obstacles may not be wolves in the literal sense, but they are predatory in this way. They intensify when they smell inner collapse. They gather force around doubt. They multiply in the climate of "what if this destroys me?" and "what if I'm not enough?" The commander's posture changes the scent completely. It says, without theatricality, that all of this exists within a larger order and that your consciousness occupies the central rank in that order. Not because you are better than others, not because you are a god over people, but because matter itself does not organize meaningfully without consciousness giving it direction. Consciousness is the king. Matter is the subject. At this point, a reasonable listener may become uneasy. But if I begin commanding reality, won't I become arrogant? Won't this inflate the ego? Won't I become one of those insufferable people who think the universe exists to flatter them? That fear matters, because the distinction here is crucial. Authority and arrogance are not the same force. In fact, they usually come from opposite inner conditions. Arrogance is insecure power. It is loud because it doubts itself. It shouts, boasts, belittles, and performs because it needs witnesses to compensate for inner weakness. Authority is different. Authority does not need volume. The true king does not scream down the corridor to remind everyone he is king. He speaks quietly because he expects alignment. Arrogance is noise. Authority is presence. So when I speak of commanding the universe, I do not mean screaming at the sky like a fanatic. I mean something far more refined and far more powerful. An internal click of certainty, a settled decision, a point beyond which there is no argument, no endless rediscussion, no emotional bargaining, no frantic checking to see if the order is still valid. It is the same force you see in a mother whose child is suddenly in danger. In that moment, she does not negotiate with the emergency. She does not fall into polite language. Something older and stronger takes over. Action becomes immediate. The body gathers itself around one truth. This will be handled. That is the current you must learn to bring to your goals. You are not begging reality to make you prosperous. You are informing reality that prosperity belongs in your field and that circumstances will now begin assembling accordingly. This is why the phrase "I am" carries such extraordinary power. Across spiritual traditions, it has always occupied sacred territory because identity is not decorative language. It is command code. Whatever you place after "I am" begins instructing the subconscious and the field about how to arrange your life. Most people use that power against themselves without realizing it. I am clumsy. I am broke. I am sick. I am unlucky. I am a mess. These sound casual, but the servant does not hear them casually. It hears decree. It hears identity delivered in first person. It hears a commander telling the machinery what protocol to run. Understood, the field says. Clumsiness confirmed. Poverty confirmed. Weakness confirmed. Executing corresponding patterns. That is why you must begin guarding identity language with unusual seriousness. If the body is tired, say the body is tired. If there is pain, say there is pain. If something requires treatment, seek treatment. But do not fuse temporary conditions with eternal identity. There is a difference between "I feel ill today" and "I am sick." There is a difference between "I am passing through financial pressure" and "I am poor." The first describes a condition. The second enthrones it. The most effective decree usually has three qualities. It is present, it is positive, and it is authoritative. Present, because "I will be" leaves the command floating forever in tomorrow, while "I am" installs it now. Positive, because the field responds more cleanly to what is affirmed than to what is denied. "I am financially free" is stronger than "I don't want debt." "I am healthy" is cleaner than "I don't want to be sick." And authoritative, because a decree is not a trembling question mark. It is a sentence. Not "could this happen?" but "this is so." The point is not to lie to yourself. The point is to begin teaching your system a new rank. One useful practice is to stand before a mirror and look not generally at your face, but precisely into one eye, as though speaking across a threshold within yourself. Some traditions say the left eye carries a deeper current, a more direct line to the soul. Whether you take that literally or symbolically does not matter much. What matters is the intensity of the meeting. Look. Do not glance, and say, in a low, steady voice, "I am the operating power in my world." Then say, "I order my subconscious to reveal opportunity. I order my body toward strength. I order my field toward peace." The purpose is not melodrama. The purpose is to stop using language like a servant and begin using it like the one who issues terms to the machine. Now let us address the most unpleasant but necessary part of this posture. What happens when reality appears to say no? You go for the loan and the bank refuses. You apply for the job and the answer is rejection. You take a step and the visible world returns a closed door. The beggar reads this immediately as destiny. It wasn't meant for me. The universe said no. Perhaps I asked for too much. The commander reads it differently. The commander does not become hysterical, but he does not surrender rank either. He says inwardly, "This no is not final truth. It is either delayed evidence from older settings, or it is one wrong door in a corridor of many doors. In either case, I remain the same person." That is metaphysical assertiveness, the refusal to accept the first negative appearance of 3D reality as absolute. This matters because visible reality is often stubborn. It has inertia. An old pattern may continue echoing after a new order is given. The commander understands this. If the Red Sea is in front and the enemy behind, he does not sit on the shore and weep as if movement itself were impossible. He raises the staff. He remains aligned. Persistence, in this sense, is not begging louder. It is holding the order without surrendering to temporary resistance. It is saying to matter, you are dense, but I am more constant than you. I can outlast your delay. I can hold the vision longer than you can maintain your old shape. Matter is slower than spirit. That does not make it stronger. One of the clearest everyday examples of true certainty is surprisingly modern and ordinary. Think of buying something online. You click buy, you receive a confirmation, and then, unless the order is unusually urgent, you move on with your day. You do not spend the night awake in panic begging the warehouse to remember you. You do not call the company crying, please send it, please send it, please send it. Why not? Because in your nervous system, the matter is resolved. The order has been placed. The process is underway. That tranquil certainty, that absence of compulsive checking, is one of the highest signals you can broadcast. It says it is already in motion. By contrast, repeated asking often reveals repeated doubt. Ask again and again from the same anxious place, and the vibration underneath becomes obvious. I'm not sure my order was enough. I'm not sure this is happening. I do not yet trust my own command. The commander does not keep reordering the same thing every 10 minutes out of panic. He orders and then rests in the fact that larger forces are already moving. That rest is not laziness. It is rank. This is why doubt must be treated not as a harmless little mood, but as an insult to your own authority. The moment doubt says, what if I can't pay the rent? What if this falls apart? What if nothing changes? The response cannot be sentimental. It must be immediate and clear. It is already being handled. This is already moving into order. I do not bow to this thought, then cut it off. Not because repression is holy, but because undisciplined doubt becomes mutiny in your own kingdom. And the body again reveals the truth of all this more honestly than words do. You cannot command reality while collapsing physically. The body is the scepter of power. Neuroscience has repeatedly shown that posture affects internal chemistry, confidence, attention, and social perception. Leaders occupy space. Lions occupy space. Strong business owners occupy space. They do not slink apologetically through rooms as if they are grateful merely to be tolerated. Their pace is usually slower. Their gestures are cleaner. Their attention is less scattered. They do not rush to prove themselves in every movement. The gaze matters here more than people think. Walk with your eyes on the ground, and the body receives one kind of message. Walk with your gaze on the horizon, and it receives another. A person who stares at the floor is usually searching for what was lost. A person who looks ahead is oriented toward what can be built. The voice matters too. Raise the pitch, speed up, over-explain, tremble through every sentence, and the field reads uncertainty. Lower the tone slightly. Slow down. Speak as if meaning precedes performance. Hurry belongs to servants. Calm belongs to kings. Silence also belongs to power. The commander does not explain every intention to every person. Plans spoken too early often leak force. Words are a kind of currency. Spend them carelessly and the charge dissipates. Keep more of them inside, especially around those who cannot support the vision, and the signal thickens. This can be tested in almost embarrassingly simple ways. Walk into a coffee shop, not with arrogance, not with theatrics, but with the calm of someone who is deeply at home in the world. You may notice that people respond differently. Space opens more easily. Service sharpens. Attention organizes. Nothing mystical needs to be imagined. Presence itself changes the field. A great deal of weakness in adults comes from one childhood wound that almost everyone carries: the addiction to permission. Permission to speak. Permission to take up space. Permission to go after what they want. Permission to be rich without guilt, powerful without apology, joyful without earning it through suffering first. They keep waiting for a mentor, a boss, a parent, a partner, or even God to finally say, "It's okay, you may live now." But no one comes. And that is because no outer authority can replace the inner coronation. The universe is not withholding permission. It is waiting for self-permission to harden into command. The host does not stand at the door of his own banquet waiting for an invitation. The table is already his. This is the essence of the commander's posture. If you want the job, do not walk into the interview only hoping that they choose you. Walk in also asking whether this environment deserves your energy. Change the frame and the signal changes with it. The prize does not chase approval. The prize evaluates alignment. Once you begin feeling like the prize, something astonishing happens. reality starts behaving less like a judge and more like a pursuer. A necessary warning belongs here, because every noble force contains the possibility of corruption. Command without heart becomes tyranny. Authority without conscience becomes domination. The posture I'm describing is not permission to crush people, manipulate others, or trample over human dignity. Your authority is over energy, over your own signal, your own thoughts, your own body, your own circumstances, your own inner kingdom. It is not a license to break the will of another person. Be ruthless with your fears, not with human beings. Be hard on doubt, not on someone else's wounds. The true king protects his people. Your people are your projects, your emotions, your health, your peace, your future. Govern them well. This is why the benevolent commander and the tyrant eventually produce different worlds around them. The tyrant wants power in order to be served. The benevolent commander wants power in order to serve more effectively, protect more faithfully, build more generously, and hold more resource for good use. Reality eventually conspires against the tyrant because disorder always rots itself from within. But strength directed by love becomes astonishingly magnetic. Now let us make this practical from the first seconds of the day. Most people wake up like nervous soldiers waiting for the world's first orders. They reach for the phone. They check messages. They search for emergencies. They let headlines, emails, and other people decide the emotional weather before their feet even touch the floor. That is not how a commander wakes. The commander issues orders before receiving noise. The instant the eyes open, there is a pause. Feel the body. Feel the fact of being alive. Then, either aloud or inwardly, decree something like this. This is my day. I order, success and joy in my world today. Nothing has the authority to disturb my peace unless I permit it. Then review the day ahead, not in dread, but in preformed command. See the meetings going well. See the roads opening. See the timing aligning. See the difficult conversation ending in clarity. This is not daydreaming. It is pre-paving the path with signal before the body walks into it. If you leave home after doing this, you do not leave as a passive civilian wandering into random conditions. You leave with the field activated. Problems hit a different surface. Opportunities stick more easily. The tone has been set. Territory has been marked. At this point, I want to introduce an idea that brings together faith and force in a way many people have never been taught to hold. Call it martial faith. Not the passive faith that whispers, "I hope something helps me," but the active faith of a warrior who has trained, who understands the laws at work, and who therefore carries certainty into battle before the outcome is visible. This faith is not hysterical. It is not fake positivity. It is disciplined aggression against doubt. When Jesus addressed the storm, he did not negotiate with it. He did not plead politely with the waves. He said, "Peace, be still." And the force of that command mattered. Your life also contains storms, debts, diagnoses, breakups, betrayals, delays, chaos, all of it. The commander's posture does not kneel before those storms, asking whether they might please calm down if conditions permit. It stands on the bow of the ship and says to the chaos, "Be still. I am the captain here." It is amazing how quickly disorder begins to reorganize when a real signal of order enters the field. Chaos respects structure. Chaos seeks rank. Chaos tests authority, yes, but once authority is unmistakable, it often begins serving it. That is your inheritance, not because you are better than anyone else, but because consciousness was never meant to crawl forever before the forms it can shape. Use this posture with wisdom. Use it with restraint. Use it with love. But use it, because the moment you stop begging the gardener for the fruit of your own orchard, the whole palace begins remembering who just walked in. Chapter 5, The Poison of Need. There is a cruel little comedy woven into human life, and once you notice it, you begin seeing it everywhere. The person you chase for years, the one you think about in the shower, in traffic, before sleep, the one for whom you rewrite your personality, lower your standards, overgive, over-explain, and silently beg to be chosen, keeps slipping farther away, as though your devotion itself had become a kind of repellent. Then one day, not because of some grand philosophy, but because exhaustion finally wins, you stop. You get tired of humiliating your own spirit. You turn back toward your own life, begin repairing your days, begin breathing again, begin remembering how to exist without that person at the center of your emotional weather. And then, almost with insulting timing, the phone rings. A message appears. Suddenly, the one who fled now reaches toward you. The same thing happens with work. When you are desperate, when your energy smells like hunger, when your worth seems tied to getting this one offer or collapsing, doors remain closed. Then later, when you already have a job, when your voice is calm, when your back is straight and your need has thinned out, other offers begin arriving from nowhere, as if the world had only been waiting for you to stop begging before it could respond. It feels personal when that happens, almost mocking, as if the universe were playing games with your pulse just to prove a point. But the universe is not mocking you. It is revealing a law. Welcome to Chapter 5, The Poison of Need. This is where desire is purified. This is where you begin to understand one of the strangest and most useful paradoxes in this work. You can only truly receive what you are willing, at some level, to live without. You can only hold what you no longer kneel before. Need is not proof of sincerity. It is vibrational suffocation. It is one of the most powerful repellents that exists. Money recoils from it. Love recoils from it. Health recoils from it. The thing you clutch too tightly often slips away, not because it was never meant for you, but because your grip itself is broadcasting fear, deficiency, and internal collapse. If the previous chapter taught you the posture of the commander, this chapter teaches you the higher refinement of that posture, the commander who is no longer emotionally enslaved to the result. That is not passivity. It is not numbness. It is not pretending not to care. It is the kind of clean inner freedom that makes a person unhookable. And that freedom is magnetic. To understand why, we have to return to the mechanics of the giant servant. Imagine again that you place an order into the field. I want $1 million. On the surface, that sounds like a command, but beneath it, there may be a completely different message screaming through the body. I need it now. If I don't get it, I am nothing. If I don't get it, I am unsafe. I am afraid. I am incomplete. I cannot breathe inside my current life. The servant hears the total signal, not merely the sentence. It evaluates the emotional subtext and asks one decisive question: what is the dominant frequency? And if the dominant frequency is scarcity, pressure, incompleteness, and fear, then that is what gets copied. Need, by its very nature, is the confirmation of not having. You cannot genuinely need what you already possess in usable form. You do not need the air currently moving in and out of your lungs. You simply breathe it. You do not need the shoes already on your feet. You are already standing in them. Need is always relational. It says there is distance between me and what would make me whole. So, the moment you vibrate need around money, you are not actually broadcasting wealth. You are broadcasting the absence of wealth. And because the universe is a faithful copier of dominant states, it continues arranging conditions that keep you in contact with need. It does not hand you the object as quickly as you imagine. It often hands you more of the emotional climate in which the object appears missing. A butterfly offers a gentler image of the same law. If you run through a garden with a net, sweating, panting, eyes wide, trying desperately to catch one delicate creature before it escapes, your intensity alone may drive it farther away. Your movement creates turbulence. Your desperation contaminates the field around you. But sit quietly among flowers. Stop acting as though the butterfly is the final piece of your identity, and something curious becomes possible. The garden relaxes around you. The very thing you were chasing may come near on its own, even land on your shoulder. Not because you manipulated it, but because you stopped disturbing the air. Chasing drives away. Allowing invites near. The universe responds more easily to the invitation of a peaceful heart than to the demand of a soul convinced it is dying of emptiness. You can feel this principle instantly in ordinary human interaction. Walk into a store and encounter a salesperson who pounces on you the moment you cross the threshold, eyes bright with private desperation, words tumbling out too quickly, body leaning in with a pressure that says, more clearly than the sales pitch itself, "Please buy from me. I need this commission. I need this to go my way." Even if the item is useful, something in you recoils. You feel watched, cornered, subtly drained. The transaction begins to feel contaminated because the energy is not one of service or confidence, but of taking. Then imagine the opposite. You enter another shop and the salesperson is composed, well-groomed, calm, occupied with their own orderliness. They greet you warmly, let you breathe, offer help without gripping your throat, and then return to their own rhythm. Suddenly, the room feels different. You have space. You do not feel hunted. You relax enough to want the thing in front of you. The product did not change. The field did. This is exactly what most people fail to see about manifestation. You are always, in one sense, selling your desire to the universe. And if the energy you bring says, "Give it to me or I collapse," the universe reads that as toxicity. It reads tension, not readiness. Need creates an excessive potential, a kind of overcharged imbalance in the field. Everything becomes too important, too loaded, too sacred, too final. And where there is too much charge, flow often stops. The root of need is almost always hidden idolatry. You place the thing you want on a pedestal and then stand beneath it. Money becomes a god. A lover becomes an angel. Perfect health becomes a miracle reserved for the chosen. The dream swells into something enormous while you shrink yourself into someone small. But everything you elevate above yourself begins looking down on you. The pedestal creates distance. This is why one of the strangest but most practical spiritual skills is learning to bring your desire down from the altar. Money is not a deity. It is paper, digits, movement, exchange, a tool no holier in essence than a hammer or a knife or a key. You do not kneel before a hammer. You use it when the work calls for it. That special person you imagine as the answer to your loneliness is not a celestial being descended to complete your existence. They are a human creature with moods, flaws, bad mornings, ordinary breath, private fears, and a nervous system no less fragile than your own. Perfect health is not an exotic jewel hidden at the center of the cosmos. It is the natural baseline of a well-ordered system. Your dream is not too much for someone of your level. It only seems gigantic because you have been rehearsing its distance. To weaken need, you must begin trivializing the goal in the healthiest sense of that word. Not disrespecting it, not becoming cynical, but normalizing it. Lowering it to human scale. Treating $1 million psychologically with more of the same naturalness with which you treat 10 cents. If that sounds outrageous, remember this. The nervous system does not resist most what is objectively large. It resists what has been framed as emotionally sacred, loaded, and dangerous. The more importance you attach, the more tension you create. The more tension you create, the less gracefully energy moves. Take away some of that exaggerated importance, and the current begins to flow again. This is the central shift, from need to preference. It sounds small, almost linguistic, but beneath the language it is a complete emotional reorganization. "I need this job or my life is over" carries the vibration of fear, emergency, fragility, and death. "I would strongly prefer this job. I would enjoy it. I could thrive there, and I will be genuinely pleased if it becomes mine, but if not, my life continues, my value remains, and another door exists." Carries an entirely different field. Preference is desire without self-annihilation. It is clean wanting. It is enthusiasm without slavery. It is the difference between a child playing a game because winning is fun and a prisoner gambling for breath. The one who prefers remains powerful. The one who needs becomes tremulous. A game is a useful metaphor here because it reveals how lightness changes performance. When someone plays a game with full engagement but without identity collapse, their body is looser, their reflexes cleaner, their attention sharper. They want to win, yes, but if they lose one round, they do not sink into months of despair. They reset, they laugh, they try again. But take that same person and convince them that the entire meaning of their life depends on one shot, one throw, one outcome. And suddenly the hand shakes, the breath shortens, the mind overthinks, the whole system becomes rigid. Need corrupts performance. Lightness improves it. The field responds more readily to the relaxed master than to the tense slave. So how does one generate that lightness honestly, especially when the stakes seem real and the practical consequences are not imaginary? One method is to destroy the illusion that you have no options. Need is often born from tunnel vision. It is this person or no one, this job or ruin, this opportunity or the end. The mind narrows, and once it narrows enough, the nervous system interprets the situation as life or death, even when it is not. To break that spell, face the feared outcome directly. Ask, with sobering honesty, what is the worst realistic scenario if this does not happen? Not the melodramatic fantasy, the actual one. If the money does not come, what then? Perhaps you sell the car, move into a smaller place, cut expenses, eat simpler food for a while, borrow time, rebuild. Would it be pleasant? Maybe not. But would it be the end of your being? Almost never. Would you still be alive? Likely yes. Would you still be able to think, move, love, try again? Also yes. The moment the nervous system sees that survival remains intact, the monster loses its teeth. The body stops treating the desire like oxygen. And paradoxically, this is often the moment when the desire begins moving closer because you have loosened the chokehold around it. This is what a mental plan B is really for. It is not a secret act of betrayal against plan A. It is not there so you can abandon the main intention too quickly. It exists to reassure the ancient survival brain that it will not die if one path closes. Once the reptilian system calms down, resistance decreases. And when resistance decreases, the preferred outcome can move through you more easily. Security clears the channel. This is closely related to what Alan Watts described as the law of reversed effort. In quicksand, the frantic instinct to struggle often drives the body downward faster. What helps is not panic, but intelligent release, a widening of the body, a decrease in useless effort, a shift from violent resistance to cooperative leverage. Manifestation works similarly. The more someone strains mentally, 5 hours of affirmations, obsessive checking, repeated ordering from the same place of tension, the more their very effort announces desperation. I do not believe it is coming, so I must keep forcing it. But the commander gives the order with clarity and then returns to life. Not because the desire is weak, but because trust has replaced compulsion. Ordering a pizza is almost embarrassingly ordinary and therefore useful. Once the order is placed, you do not keep calling every 3 minutes to ask whether the pizza exists, whether the cook remembers you, whether the oven is working, whether perhaps your hunger will persuade the driver to move faster. If you did that, people would hear the instability immediately. You order. You hang up. You set the table. Maybe you go wash your hands. You know it is coming. That atmosphere of calm expectation is faith stripped of performance. It is what the field understands best. Need is also sustained by a deeper identity mistake, perhaps the deepest of all. The belief that you are fundamentally incomplete and that the desired object contains the missing ingredient that will finally make you whole. When I have that money, then I will be secure. When I have that partner, then I will be lovable. When I drive that car, then I will matter. When my body looks like that, then I will be enough. But if you are not inwardly capable of touching wholeness now, the object itself will not save you. An empty person with more money usually becomes a more expensive emptiness. A lonely person with a partner often becomes a more frightened loneliness. The object amplifies what is already there. You are not an unfinished cake waiting for love or wealth to become edible. You are already the cake. The desire is the cherry. It is decoration, delight, and enhancement, a pleasant addition, not the missing substance of your being. This is not spiritual flattery. It is structural truth. You are already consciousness, already life, already value in motion. A partner may be beautiful company. Money may be a useful ornament. A sports car may be enjoyable. But none of these things complete what was never fundamentally broken. Once the system begins to feel this, even in glimpses, need starts evaporating. And what remains is a very attractive signal. I already enjoy being myself, and I would also enjoy that. The universe responds generously to fullness because fullness is stable. It tends to resist pouring endlessly into emotional black holes that interpret every gift as insufficient 5 minutes later. Fill yourself first, not with delusion, but with self-respect, peace, gratitude, and enough inward sufficiency that desire becomes celebration rather than rescue. When fullness leads, outer gifts arrive more naturally as extensions of that state. A quick switch can help in moments when need grabs the throat and narrows the world again. It is almost laughably simple, which is why many people underestimate it. Ask, so what? Not with cynicism, but with liberating proportion. What if they do not call? So what? There are billions of people on the planet and your life does not end tonight. What if you lose the client? So what? Another can come. Perhaps one better aligned and better paying. What if they criticize you? So what? Criticism has never once rewritten your essence. The phrase snaps the ego out of melodrama. It reminds the nervous system that it is not standing on the edge of literal death, and that return to proportion reopens power. The less emotionally conquered you are by the possibility of failure, the more available you become to success. This does not mean indifference in the lazy sense. Detachment is not resignation. It is not collapsing onto the sofa muttering, "Whatever happens, happens," while doing nothing. The right state is active surrender. The intention is made of steel. You know what you want. You move toward it. You aim clearly. But you are no longer trying to control every second of the route, every detail of the timing, every angle of delivery. The image of the archer captures this beautifully. The archer has full intention. He selects the target carefully. He draws the bow with strength. He steadies the breath. He aims. But for the arrow to fly, he must release the string. If fear makes him clutch the bow forever, no flight occurs. The moment of real power is not only the aiming, it is the letting go. Need is the hand that refuses to release. Trust is the hand that opens. And very often, right after you have made a clear desire known, reality seems to test exactly this. Something delays. Something appears to go wrong. Something is taken away, or it looks as though the opposite of your desire is gathering force. This is where need gets exposed. The universe, if we speak symbolically, seems to ask, will you panic now? Will you return to scarcity? Will you prove that your faith was only borrowed confidence as long as the surface stayed pleasant? If you panic, you strengthen the old order. If you stay grounded, if you say inwardly, this is appearance, not verdict. My preference remains. My state remains. I do not move from here. Then something remarkable often happens. The pressure breaks. The gates open. Reality smells fear in much the same way animals do. If you are terrified of losing, the whole field begins organizing around your terror. But when the fear of loss falls away, reality loses much of its power to dominate you. And once it loses its power over you, your power over it increases. That is why the final lesson of this chapter is not want less, but want cleanly. Desire fully. Aim clearly. Love the game. But stop poisoning your own signal with the belief that your life depends on the cherry. Stand in your preference. Release your need. And watch how the giant servant begins to organize the world more easily around the one who already knows they are complete. Chapter 6. Radical Assumption. Some of the worst advice in modern life is delivered with a smile, printed on coffee mugs, dropped into films as if it were wisdom, repeated by friends who mean well and yet do not realize the damage hidden inside it. The advice is this: just be yourself. It sounds warm, it sounds healthy, it sounds almost sacred. But if you stop and look at it without sentiment, the absurdity becomes obvious. If the self you are currently being is anxious, broke, wounded, reactive, self-doubting, and built from inherited fears, then why would continuing to be that self produce anything except a more polished version of the same suffering? If your present identity has led you into confusion, exhaustion, scarcity, and repetition, then loyalty to that identity is not authenticity. It is self-betrayal disguised as virtue. What most people call myself is rarely some pure and original essence. More often, it is a pile of conditioning, unfinished pain, family programming, social imitation, old humiliations, repeated reactions, survival habits, and protective masks that became so familiar they started feeling sacred. To defend that identity simply because it feels familiar is to defend the walls of your own prison. And this is where the chapter becomes sharp. If you want a new life, the old you cannot remain in charge. The old identity has to die. Not physically, but psychologically, energetically, symbolically. A kind of metaphysical suicide becomes necessary. You must leave behind the person who kept reproducing the old world, because the universe does not respond to what you vaguely wish for while staying the same. It responds to who you are being. Welcome to Chapter 6, Radical Assumption. This is the chapter where false authenticity is exposed. Poor people are often authentically poor in the sense that poverty has become naturalized inside their gestures, speech, expectations, and internal conversations. Wealthy people are often authentically wealthy in the same way. It is not only about numbers. It is a state, an atmosphere, a way of moving through the world. If you want to change sides, you cannot begin by waiting until the evidence arrives. You have to become, in a very real sense, an imposter before the world grants you official permission. You have to occupy the identity before the proof. You have to wear the role so consistently that reality is forced to harden your performance into fact. People say, fake it till you make it. A better phrase would be this: fake it until you become it. At the heart of this chapter stands one of the most precise and dangerous ideas ever given to modern seekers, a principle articulated with unusual sharpness by Neville Goddard. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not merely imagine the outcome from a distance, not merely think about success as though it were hanging somewhere out in the future, but assume the inner state of already being the one for whom the desired reality is normal. His teaching is subtle and brutal at the same time, because it insists on something most people resist. Even if the fulfilled desire is false to the senses, if you persist in the feeling of its fulfillment, it will eventually solidify into fact. That phrase, false to the senses, is the test. Your senses say the money is not here. Your senses say you are still alone. Your senses say the body is not yet transformed. Radical assumption begins precisely where sensory evidence tries to veto identity. This is why the shift is not about thinking of success, but thinking from success. The difference seems small until you feel it in the body. Thinking about $1 million places the money at a distance. It creates longing, separation, future tense. Thinking from the state of already being a millionaire changes the angle entirely. Now the question becomes different. How does the chair feel when you sit in it as someone for whom money is natural? How does coffee taste when there is no fear behind the sip? How does the city look through the eyes of someone who no longer feels hunted by bills? How does the body breathe when the identity of lack has already been retired? The physical facts may not yet have caught up, but the mold has to be shaped first. The universe fills molds. If the mold remains shaped like poverty, then more poverty is poured in. Change the mold, and the outer world begins looking for ways to match it. Actors understand this better than many spiritual people do. Watch what happens when a great method actor prepares for a role. He does not simply pretend when the camera starts rolling. He begins living as the character. If the role requires injury, he studies how the body carries pain. If the role requires royalty, he adjusts gait, voice, eye contact, appetite, demands, timing, posture. He lets the role colonize him. He wears it long enough that the distinction between performance and person begins to blur. The chemistry changes. The nervous system changes. The body starts receiving the new identity as familiar. You are no different. You are the lead actor in the film of your own life. But for too long, you have been lazily playing the same role. The overworried one, the disappointed one, the overlooked one, the one who braces for bad news, the one whose facial muscles already know the shape of defeat. And then, when you are asked to play someone else, the prosperous one, the powerful one, the deeply loved one, the person who is internally settled and externally rising, you protest. But I don't feel like that. Of course you do not feel like that. It is a new role. New shoes feel strange. A new suit feels stiff. A new walk feels exaggerated. That is not evidence against the method. It is evidence that the role is new. Radical assumption is the willingness to bear that discomfort. You wear the identity before it feels natural. You endure the awkwardness of feeling slightly false, slightly theatrical, slightly unlike your old self. Then something remarkable happens. Repetition erodes resistance. One day, the acting becomes less effortful. Another day, you notice you did not have to remember. And eventually, the role stops being a role. It becomes your new baseline. This is why imposter syndrome in this context is not always an enemy. Most people fear that inner voice that says, "Who do you think you are? You are not this confident. You are not this successful. You are not this healthy, this powerful, this desired, this composed. You're a fraud." But from another angle, imposter syndrome can be interpreted as evidence that you are entering new territory. If you never feel like an imposter, you may simply be staying inside the boundaries of the old identity. When you step into a larger self-image, the old subconscious often rebels. It throws up shame, panic, hesitation, embarrassment, and internal accusations. Your task is not to obey that voice. Your task is to continue holding the character. If it helps, you can even answer that voice directly. Yes, I am replacing my old failed role with a new one, and I intend to play it so convincingly that even my body will believe it. And that is not fantasy. The brain's plasticity makes this possible in concrete ways. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. Identity is not only an idea, it is a rehearsed pattern. If you act with confidence, composure, and clarity for 30 days straight, the brain does not treat that as irrelevant theater. It begins adapting. New routes become easier. Old ones weaken. The nervous system starts updating its predictions. What felt fake begins to feel less strange. What felt impossible starts becoming ordinary. So faking, in the intelligent sense, is not deception, it is training. Clothing can play a surprisingly important role in this, because identity is not only internal. Psychologists sometimes use the phrase enclothed cognition to describe the measurable way clothing affects thought and behavior. Put a white coat on someone, and depending on the meaning assigned to it, attention can sharpen. Put on a tailored suit, and many people negotiate with more authority. Wear old, stretched-out clothing all day, and the body often drifts toward passivity. None of this is mystical. The costume influences the role. If you want radical assumption to become embodied, use the costume. You do not have to dress absurdly or expensively, but you do have to stop dressing in ways that constantly remind your system of the old identity. If you want the life of a magnate, an empress, a builder, a creator, and yet spend the day in stained pajamas, unwashed hair, and the posture of someone who has already quit, your clothes are issuing commands against your intention. Dress for the life you are installing. That does not mean vanity. It means identity engineering. Shave on a Tuesday. Comb your hair, even if no one important will see you. Wear your good fragrance on an ordinary day. Stand in front of the mirror and allow the eyes to meet someone who already looks more like the future than the past. The easier it is for the senses to cooperate, the easier it is to maintain the assumption. Walking matters too. Observe your old walk. Is it hurried, contracted, apologetic, head lowered, always adjusting around other people, always signaling that you are slightly sorry to exist? That is not a neutral walk. It is the walk of scarcity. Now imagine a person with $10 million in the bank, not because the number itself is magical, but because what that number usually symbolizes is safety, margin, time, room. How would such a person walk? More slowly, perhaps, with less urgency, with a chest that is not braced, with shoulders softer, eyes steadier, steps less frantic. A lion is not in a hurry. A king does not scramble. Space belongs to him. Time belongs to him. Practice that now before the evidence arrives. Walk as if reality owes an explanation for any mismatch between your posture and your current numbers. The servant notices that. The master walks like someone with millions, it says. Then the absence of millions must be an accounting error. Correct it. Inner language must change with equal seriousness. Neville Goddard emphasized inner conversations because what you say silently to yourself all day is often more creative than anything you speak aloud. Listen to the old identity and its script becomes obvious. Everything is too expensive. No one values me. I'm exhausted. I hope Friday comes fast. I always get the worst outcome. Those are not harmless thoughts. They are the private lines of a very old character. If you want a new identity, the script must be rewritten. The future self does not speak that way. Confronted with the same electric bill, the old self says, "This is robbery. I can't handle this." The new self, speaking from abundance, says something very different. "Thank you for the service. I am fully capable of meeting this." Even if the outer wallet still feels tight, the inner conversation cannot be allowed to default to poverty. In the physical world, you may still have to count coins. In the mental world, you cannot afford the luxury of rehearsing lack. The same principle applies to heartbreak, rejection, inconvenience, and loss. If the old identity is left in charge, it reacts with begging, collapse, drama, panic. The new identity reacts from self-possession. A breakup no longer means "my world is over." It becomes "I understand." If you leave, you create room for what belongs more fully to my level. Go in peace. That kind of response does not only preserve dignity, it accelerates collapse of the old timeline because it refuses to keep feeding the abandoned self. Now we reach the hardest part of all, the trial by fire. You begin assuming wealth. You dress well. You walk differently. You speak to yourself differently. You act as though your life is already being reorganized. Then you go to the machine and see the words, insufficient balance. The senses mock you. The 3D world spits in your face and says, "Look at you. You're pretending. You're a clown wearing confidence over emptiness. In that moment, the whole chapter is tested. You have two choices. You can believe the mirror and surrender the role, or you can recognize the mirror as delayed evidence. The successful path is not to deny the literal number. It is to deny the authority of the number over identity. This is temporary liquidity, not my essence. This is old evidence, not final truth. I know who I am. That distinction preserves the signal. Without it, the old character rushes back in and the scene resets. Maintaining the role when the set is falling apart is what convinces reality that the new identity is genuine. If you only play the part when circumstances are pleasant, the performance remains shallow. But if you continue holding the character when appearances are rude, when timing is stubborn, when numbers are late, when doors are slow to open, the producer of reality begins to trust the role. It starts organizing scenes to match the one who will not step out of character. There is a beautiful technique that strengthens this process through memory. Normally, memory is used to revisit the past. Here, memory is recruited to colonize the future. At night, before sleep, instead of reviewing the day that actually happened, review the ideal day as though it already occurred. Today I signed that contract. Today I walked into that office. Today I celebrated with the person I love. Today I felt that ease in my body. Add sensory detail. Build the fake memory so richly that the hippocampus begins treating it with familiarity. The subconscious loves the familiar. It works constantly to reproduce what feels known. When wealth, love, confidence, and success become familiar in inner memory, poverty starts feeling strange. Lack becomes the anomaly. And the system begins correcting toward what now feels normal. Medicine provides a parallel that should make this less mysterious. The placebo effect has demonstrated repeatedly that a fake pill, administered with authority and received with belief, can produce real physiological changes. The sugar was fake. The expectation was real. The bodily response was real. You are your own placebo. The new identity is the sugar pill. At first, it may feel theatrical, even laughable, but swallow it with enough faith, enough repetition, enough consistency, and the results become embodied. The bank account shifts, the body shifts, relationships shift. Do not dismiss the power of a useful fiction. Much of human progress began as imagination stubbornly held before the senses approved it. Think of someone entering a VIP event without an invitation. The successful intruder rarely sneaks in nervously. He walks in as if he belongs, speaks to the staff naturally, moves with the ease of someone who assumes the rope was always meant to open for him. He does not advertise fear. He does not ask the room whether he belongs. He behaves as though belonging were already settled. That is the attitude radical assumption requires. Stop waiting for the invitation to your own success. Enter. Dress like one who belongs. Speak like one who belongs. Move like one who belongs. The universe, in this metaphor, is the guard at the rope. If it sees doubt, it asks for credentials. If it sees belonging, the velvet opens. Appropriate your desire. Not steal it in the low sense, but wear it now as something already existing at the subtler level of identity. If you feel guilty, remember Chapter 2. The universe is not measuring whether you deserve to enter by moral paperwork. It responds to the signal of belonging, certainty, audacity, and sustained character. It cares less about whether you feel worthy and more about whether you are willing to inhabit the state. To make this practical, devote one full day to the experiment of embodiment. Choose your avatar, your future self made specific. Write this person down. How does this version of you dress? What time do they rise? What do they eat for breakfast? How do they answer emails? How do they greet the neighbor? What kind of music fills the car? What words never leave their mouth? Then for 24 hours, from waking until sleep, let that avatar occupy you. Before every choice, ask, what would this version do now? If the old self would eat from stress, but the avatar would move the body, then move the body. If the old self would gossip, complain, or collapse, but the avatar would stay composed, then stay composed. It is a game, yes, it is also a rewiring. By the end of that day, many people notice something both obvious and shocking. They feel better, the body feels cleaner, the mind is less noisy, people respond differently, timing feels different. And the terrifying question arises, if identity is this choosable, then how many years have been wasted worshiping the old character as if it were destiny? Identity is not a prison sentence. It is a role maintained by repetition. You are the author. Rewrite the character, and reality, sooner or later, begins rewriting the plot. Chapter 7: The Time Trap. Most disappointment is not born from failure. It is born from misunderstanding time. A person gives a new order to life, holds a stronger state for 3 days, maybe 7, maybe even 2 good weeks, and then looks around, sees the same bank balance, the same tension, the same unanswered email, the same heavy furniture of the old world still sitting in place, and concludes that nothing is happening. That conclusion feels sensible, but it is usually wrong. What the eyes are seeing is not the full truth of the present. It is the delayed echo of an older command. And until this is understood at a deep level, people sabotage themselves precisely when the process is beginning to work. This is why Chapter 7 matters so much. Welcome to the Time Trap. Here you begin to understand the basic physics of manifestation, not in the exaggerated way of fantasy, but in the practical way that explains why the invisible often moves faster than the visible. If this chapter lands properly, disappointment loses most of its poison. You stop behaving like a frightened beginner firing one shot and then throwing the weapon down because the target has not yet fallen. You start behaving more like a trained sniper. The shot has already left, the trajectory is already in motion, and the visible impact is now a matter of travel time, not uncertainty. To understand this, you have to respect the density of matter. In the inner plane, the mental plane, the imaginal plane, change is almost immediate. Think of a pink elephant and the image appears at once. There is no loading screen, no shipping delay, no traffic jam. Inner reality is light, fast, fluid. But the physical plane is different. The body is slower, money is slower, relationships are slower. Institutions, schedules, habits, paperwork, logistics, all of it moves with drag and inertia. The outer world is not unresponsive. It is heavy. A useful image is the difference between a speedboat and an ocean liner. Your thought can turn like a speedboat. One decision, one shift in self-concept, one moment of real clarity, and the mind can pivot instantly. But your life in physical form is more like a giant ship loaded with steel containers. If you turn the rudder hard today, the ship does not snap around in 1 second. It keeps moving in the old direction for a while because mass carries momentum. If you are an inexperienced captain, this delay makes you panic. The wheel doesn't work. I turned, but we are still moving toward the same danger. This must be false. Then you let go of the wheel, which is the worst thing you could do. The seasoned captain understands that the turn already happened at the level of command. The engines have received it. The mechanism is engaged. The mass simply needs time to respond. Your life is that ocean liner. If you have spent 20 years, 30 years, even 40 years broadcasting scarcity, fear, self-doubt, resentment, or emotional dependence, do not expect the visible structure of your life to spin 180 degrees because you held a clean signal for 3 days. That would not be transformation. That would be cartoon logic. Deeply repeated states create momentum. So the delay is not proof that the new order failed. Often it is proof that the old one had accumulated force. The task is to keep the new order steady during the hysteresis period, that strange stretch of time when nothing seems to be happening on the surface while everything important is reorganizing underneath it. This is also why instant manifestation, the thing so many people claim they want, would actually be a nightmare. If every thought produced an immediate physical event, human life would be unlivable. Think of how many catastrophic, violent, irrational, or intrusive thoughts flash through the average mind in a single day. A moment of rage in traffic, a dark fantasy in an argument, a panic spiral at 3 a.m., a sudden image of illness, accident, humiliation, disaster. If the field obeyed all of that instantly, the world would collapse into chaos before sunset. The delay is a mercy. It is a safety buffer. It gives you a grace period between mental impulse and physical consequence. In a way, time behaves like the undo send function on an email. The order begins forming, but the system waits to see whether the signal is momentary or dominant, whether it is noise or command, whether today's thought of wealth will still be there tomorrow, or whether it will be replaced by the old chant of poverty before lunch. The field is not being cruel when it delays. It is being discerning. It is asking, in effect, is this the new identity or just a mood? That protects you from stray negativity, but it also means your positive signal must be sustained long enough to pass through the filter and become form. A beautiful metaphor for this comes from astronomy. When you look at the night sky and see a star, you are not seeing it in pure present time. The light may have traveled for years to reach your eyes. In some cases, you may be looking at a star that no longer exists in the form you imagine. The visible light is real, but it is old. It is history arriving late. Your current reality works the same way. Look at your body. Look at your house. Look at your relationship patterns. Look at your balance. In many cases, what you are seeing is the light of an old star. It is the visible report of thoughts, emotions, reactions, and assumptions that were dominant months ago, perhaps even years ago. The fatal mistake is to react emotionally to the dead star as if it were the final word. If today's bank balance reflects older consciousness and you respond to it with fresh despair, then your despair becomes a new cause that will print future lack. That is how the cycle keeps renewing itself. Past creates present. Present triggers negative reaction. Reaction becomes the seed of the future. And then people say nothing ever changes, when in truth, they have been recopying the same file. To break that cycle, you have to become strangely indifferent to the authority of the present. Not careless, not impractical, not blind in the literal sense, but inwardly unwilling to let old evidence dictate current identity. The present is already manifested. In one sense, it is already too late for it. What matters now is what you are broadcasting into the next layer of time. The commander can walk through the ruins of an old life with a smile because he understands what those ruins are: delayed architecture. He knows the new blueprints are already under construction where the eyes cannot yet verify them. This leads to another place where people get confused. They imagine manifestation as theatrical magic, a Harry Potter moment, a bag of money appearing on the table, a miracle dropping from the ceiling in glowing light. Sometimes reality does move in abrupt ways, and there are moments that feel miraculous. But most of the time, the universe works through what Neville Goddard called the bridge of incidents. This is one of the most useful ideas in the entire field because it explains why the path often looks ordinary and sometimes even unpleasant, while still leading to the exact result you asked for. A bridge of incidents is a chain of events that appears natural, logical, and often accidental, yet is secretly carrying you toward the fulfillment of the order. The trouble is that many people judge the bridge too soon. They ask for a joyful job that pays triple, and 2 days later they get fired from the mediocre position they were too afraid to leave. They panic. This is proof that the method failed. I asked for abundance, and now I'm worse off than before. But what if the firing was not the punishment? What if it was the first structural step of the bridge? What if reality had to remove you from one low ceiling before it could move you toward the better room? Because you judged the package by the wrapping paper, you nearly threw away the gift unopened. This is a vital discipline. After you give a serious order, do not rush to label the next event as bad. If the car breaks down, if a relationship ends, if a door closes, if something gets rearranged in a way your old mind does not like, pause. Assume first that the furniture may be moving. Assume first that this may be part of the bridge. That assumption alone changes the quality of the experience. Obstacles often become stepping stones when they are interpreted correctly. Bamboo offers another image, one that is especially helpful for people who suffer from time anxiety. Imagine planting bamboo. You water it. You care for the soil. You keep the ground alive. A week passes and there is nothing. A month passes and there is still nothing. A year passes and still the earth looks flat. An impatient person eventually decides the whole process was a lie, digs up the seed, curses the method, and destroys the very thing that was growing. What they failed to understand is that some varieties of bamboo spend years building roots before the visible surge begins. In certain stories of growth, people speak of 5 years beneath the surface, then astonishing visible expansion, up to 30 meters in 6 weeks, once the root system is finally established. Whether the exact horticultural number varies by species is less important than the principle. Some manifestations are bamboo. They require an underground phase. Networks are forming, contacts are moving, timing is aligning, other minds are being nudged. You cannot see roots from the surface. Your job during the dark phase is not to dig up the seed every 3 days in search of proof. Your job is to keep watering. And how do you water? With assumption, with gratitude, with steadiness, with refusal to crown the current surface as king. Most people quit 1 yard before the gold. Not because the gold was never there, but because darkness insulted their patience. If you can learn to trust the unseen phase, your life changes. Love the darkness. Learn to recognize invisible construction as part of the process instead of proof of absence. Now we have to deal with one of the mind's most destructive habits, the need to control how and when. The commander gives the order of what? I want financial freedom. That is clear. But then the mind begins micromanaging. It must come through the lottery, and it must happen by Friday. That is not mastery. That is insecurity trying to supervise infinity. The universe has millions of routes that your ordinary reasoning cannot see. Perhaps the lottery is not the efficient path. Perhaps it comes through a contract, an investment, a new skill, a gift, a business, a partnership, a relocation, a sale, or a chain of events you would never have designed from the front end. If you obsess over one route, you close 999 others with your own rigidity. The same is true of timing. Fixating on Friday creates tension. Fixating on a specific date often breeds countdown anxiety. The job of consciousness is the what and the quality of the state. The job of the larger field is the how and the when. And sometimes delay is not punishment, but preparation. If the million arrived today inside an identity that still thinks and feels like lack, perhaps it would be lost in a year, misused, or turned into a more expensive form of suffering. Sometimes time is not just bridge time. It is maturation time. The universe may be waiting for your avatar, your Chapter 6 self, to become stable enough to hold what you are asking for without breaking it. So instead of asking, when does it arrive? A better posture is, I am becoming ready to hold it fully. Waiting time is often training time. During this period, another predictable visitor appears, doubt. It often comes at odd hours, especially when the world is quiet and the body is tired. It whispers with fake intelligence. Be realistic. Look at the bills. Look at the evidence. You're embarrassing yourself. None of this is real. Many people hear that voice and assume it means the process is failing. Usually it means the threshold has been reached. Doubt is often the guardian of the gate. It appears because a real shift is underway and the old self wants one last vote. Do not debate with doubt for too long. Logic rarely defeats it in that moment, because logic, if used narrowly, can point to all the old evidence. Doubt is not handled by pleading. It is handled by authority. I hear you, you say inwardly, but you are not authorized. The order remains in effect. Then move attention. Do something physical. Walk, clean, stretch, dance, run, shower, reset the body. Get energy out of the head. Treat doubt like construction noise outside the building. Annoying, yes, but not relevant enough to stop your whole life. A more elegant way to survive the waiting period is to change the emotional style of the wait itself. Do not wait like someone standing in the rain for a late bus, checking the watch every 2 minutes, muttering, pacing, growing miserable. Wait like someone sitting in a VIP lounge with a valid boarding pass in hand. The plane is coming. You are already on the list. There is no need to stand pressed against the runway fence staring at the sky. Read. Breathe. Enjoy the drink. Relax your jaw. Anxiety does not summon the aircraft faster. It only turns waiting into self-torture. This is one of the hidden paradoxes of time. The best way to collapse it is often to stop worshiping it. Live. Enjoy the current season as much as possible. Fill the day with meaningful motion instead of obsessive checking. Watch how often the thing arrives when you are no longer gripping the clock by the throat. And there are signs, often subtle at first, that the download is nearing completion. 2 of the most common are worth remembering. The first is apparent chaos. Everything looks as though it is getting worse all at once. Old structures rattle. People behave strangely. Loose ends show up. Delays intensify. This often feels like failure, but very often it is restructuring. The ship is turning. Furniture is moving. Systems are being rewritten. The second sign is detachment. Suddenly one day, you wake up and notice that the sharp, urgent need has thinned out. You feel oddly calm. You think, you know what? I'm actually okay. That moment is more powerful than most people realize. It often means resistance has dropped close to zero. And very often, hours or days after reaching that clean, detached state, the visible manifestation appears. Because the mind is biased toward noticing trouble and forgetting subtle proof, an evidence journal becomes extremely useful here. Write down the breadcrumbs. Found $5 unexpectedly? Note it. A conversation opened a new possibility? Note it. Someone smiled at you and brightened your day? Note it. A strange coincidence moved in your favor? Note it. Felt a burst of peace for no reason? Note it. The point is not to become childish or superstitious. The point is to train the brain to notice that the field is responding. When discouragement comes, the journal reminds you that movement is already happening. And beneath all of this sits one final truth. Time, as you experience it, belongs mainly to the human nervous system. The genie, the field, consciousness at its deeper level, does not experience the order the way your clock does. It reads state in the now. Do not measure success by what the eyes can verify this afternoon. Measure it by what your mind is holding now, by whether you can remain in abundance while looking at temporary poverty, by whether you can remain in peace while temporary noise still echoes around you. If your inner state remains firm, you have already shifted the cause. The effect is on its way. Be the patient master. Be the steady master. The ship is turning. This is not the moment to release the wheel. But there is a way to burn through inertia faster, a kind of nuclear fuel for the waiting period, something most people use only after the package arrives, when in fact its greatest power appears before arrival. It is gratitude, but not the ordinary gratitude you already know. I am talking about preventive gratitude. Chapter 8, Preventive Gratitude. A strange habit follows most people through life so quietly that it never feels like a habit at all, more like a natural law that no one questions. Something good happens, something arrives, something opens, and only then does appreciation appear, almost as a reflex, a soft thank you that closes the moment and moves on, as if gratitude were simply a polite response placed neatly at the end of an event, rather than a force that could shape what comes before it. If you slow that scene down and look at it more carefully, something subtle begins to reveal itself. Something that explains why so many people wait for life to change and feel as if it never quite does. Because in that simple pattern, there is an assumption built in so deeply that it goes unnoticed. The assumption that reality must move first, and only then can the inner state follow. Which means gratitude, as it has been practiced, has been trained to arrive too late to influence anything. This is where the direction quietly reverses. Welcome to Chapter 8. Preventive gratitude, where the sequence shifts, not in a dramatic or mystical way, but in a precise and almost practical way that begins to explain why some internal states seem to accelerate change while others keep it delayed, and why gratitude, when understood differently, starts behaving less like a reaction and more like a signal that precedes form. Because there is a distinction here that changes the entire structure once it is felt, rather than merely heard. Gratitude is not limited to acknowledging what has already happened. It can also be used to establish what is about to happen, and when it is used in that way, it begins to function as a kind of receipt, not printed on paper, but generated internally as a confirmation that something has already been accepted at a deeper level. To understand this more clearly, it helps to return briefly to the idea introduced earlier, the idea of the cosmic radio from Chapter 1, where different internal states correspond to different frequencies, not metaphorically, but in the sense that each state carries a distinct signature. Asking carries the quiet tone of absence because it implies something is not yet present. Waiting carries the tone of uncertainty because it implies something may or may not arrive. But gratitude carries a different tone altogether, one that is easy to overlook because it feels so familiar, and yet it is the only one among the three that naturally aligns with possession. When someone feels genuine gratitude, they are not anticipating, not hoping, not negotiating. They are, even if only for a moment, experiencing the sensation that something is already theirs. And this sensation leaves a measurable imprint in the body, because the brain does not easily produce authentic gratitude for something it truly experiences as missing. It produces gratitude for something it recognizes as present. which is why the act of feeling gratitude before visible evidence appears creates a kind of internal contradiction that, when sustained, begins to reorganize perception itself. And here it becomes important to remember something that has already been established. Remember chapter 1. It does not hear the word thanks. It feels the vibration of appreciation, which means that the system does not respond to the sentence, but to the state behind it. And when that state reflects completion rather than absence, the interpretation shifts, not because something external has been convinced, but because the signal itself has changed. And reality, in its own way, begins adjusting to match that signal. A simple image can bring this into clearer focus. Imagine walking into a store and purchasing something large and tangible, something like a television. You complete the payment, receive a receipt, and are told that the item will be delivered the next day. And then you leave the store without the object itself, carrying only a piece of paper. Yet as you walk away, there is no sense of lack, no urgency, no repeated questioning of whether it will arrive, because ownership has already been established in a way that does not depend on immediate physical possession. And if someone were to ask you about it, you would not say that you hope to have it. You would say that you already bought it. The receipt closes the gap. Preventive gratitude functions in a similar manner, not by pretending that something exists physically when it does not, but by establishing a form of internal ownership that reduces the tension between now and later. And that reduction in tension removes one of the main forms of resistance that slows the process, which is the constant emotional signal of not having. Because anxiety, when observed closely, is not simply discomfort. It is a form of broadcasting that says, again and again, this is not mine. And that signal, repeated often enough, reinforces the very condition it reacts to, while gratitude sends a different message, one that suggests completion rather than absence. And that difference begins to influence how the system organizes what comes next. There is also a biological layer to this that deepens the understanding. The brain does not treat all emotional states equally, and certain states are difficult to sustain simultaneously at high intensity, fear and gratitude among them, because one prepares the system for threat while the other opens it toward connection and restoration. And although the shift between them may not be instantaneous, it is noticeable, and over time it becomes something that can be directed rather than left to chance. This is where the connection to Chapter 7 becomes relevant again. The demon of Chapter 7, that quiet voice that appears during moments of delay and uncertainty, does not always respond to argument because it draws its strength from the visible evidence of the present. But when the state shifts from fear to gratitude, even slightly, its influence begins to weaken, not because it has been defeated logically, but because the emotional ground it stands on has changed. Instead of engaging in a prolonged internal debate, the direction is altered. Where the mind begins to tighten around what is missing, attention is gently redirected toward what is already forming, even if it cannot yet be seen clearly. And in that redirection, the system moves from reaction toward creation. There is also a psychological nuance that makes gratitude particularly effective compared to more direct forms of self-instruction. The logical mind, which often resists statements that feel disconnected from visible reality, tends to challenge direct affirmations, especially when they appear too far removed from current conditions. But gratitude does not enter in the same way. It does not declare, it acknowledges. And because of that, it passes through the same mental filters with less resistance, entering more quietly. And once it settles, it begins influencing deeper layers without triggering the same level of opposition. It has often been described, in simple terms, as a kind of Trojan horse, not because it deceives, but because it enters where more direct approaches are blocked, carrying with it a shift that unfolds from within. The real test of this, however, does not occur when conditions are comfortable. Anyone can feel grateful when things are already aligned. The difference appears in less stable moments, when the external world has not yet caught up with the internal shift, when the old structures are still visible, when the delay described in Chapter 7 is still unfolding. In those moments, gratitude becomes something else. It becomes a position. Chapter 7, you see the end. You say, in a quieter and steadier way, "Thank you, universe, for this movement." Not because the situation itself is pleasant, but because you recognize that what appears on the surface may be part of a larger rearrangement, part of the bridge, part of the process that does not always reveal itself immediately. And that recognition changes the relationship. Instead of feeding the situation with resistance, you begin to withdraw attention from what no longer needs to grow. And over time, what is not fed begins to dissolve, while what is supported begins to strengthen. This shift is gradual, not abrupt, but it is consistent. To stabilize it, repetition helps, not as rigid discipline, but as a form of familiarity. In the morning, before external input takes over, a short period of intentional appreciation can begin to set the tone, not only for what is already present, but for what is forming. And by blending the two, the mind begins to loosen its rigid distinction between now and later. At night, the same principle can be extended, not by reviewing only what has happened, but by writing what has already unfolded in the next day, in a way that feels natural rather than forced, creating a sense of continuity that carries forward into experience. These are not strict routines, they are tools, and their effect comes from consistency rather than intensity. There is, however, a distinction that remains important. Gratitude cannot exist fully at the level of words alone. If the words suggest appreciation, but the underlying feeling reflects fear or tension, the deeper signal remains unchanged, which is why it becomes useful to begin with something that genuinely evokes appreciation, something small, something real, and allow that feeling to expand gradually, rather than attempting to force it at a level that does not yet feel accessible. Over time, this leads to a state that might be described as sufficiency. Not the absence of desire, but the absence of urgency. A sense that even while things are still unfolding, something essential is already in place. And from that state, the relationship with outcomes begins to shift. Because when the internal signal reflects fullness rather than lack, the external response often begins to align with that tone in ways that are not always predictable, but are consistently noticeable. There is also an outward extension of this. Gratitude begins to include what is observed in others, not as comparison, but as recognition. And this recognition changes how the environment is perceived, because what is appreciated feels closer, while what is resisted feels distant. And over time, the world begins to reflect that shift in subtle but meaningful ways. From there, waiting itself changes. It becomes less tense, less monitored, less defined by constant checking, and more like a quiet certainty that does not require repeated confirmation. And within that certainty, preparation naturally follows, not as forced action, but as alignment. Space is made, details are adjusted, the environment begins to reflect what is expected. And yet, even here, something may still remain beneath the surface, something quieter, less obvious. A hesitation that does not always appear in clear thoughts, but influences behavior nonetheless. A question of whether receiving is truly allowed. And if that layer is not addressed, it can interrupt the process at a very late stage, sometimes just as everything is about to align, which is where the next chapter begins. Not with attracting more, but with removing what quietly prevents what is already moving toward you from fully arriving. Chapter 9. Neutralizing the Saboteur. A pattern appears in many lives with such precision that once noticed, it becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Progress gathers quietly, conditions improve, something meaningful is about to open. And then, almost at the exact point where movement would become undeniable, a small but decisive disruption intervenes, not dramatic enough to be called catastrophe, yet effective enough to shift direction just slightly. Enough to delay. Enough to derail, enough to return the situation to something more familiar. At first, it is tempting to explain these moments as bad timing or simple misfortune, but when the same pattern repeats across different areas, work, relationships, health, money, it begins to suggest a different explanation, one that points inward rather than outward, toward a mechanism that activates not when things are at their worst, but precisely when they are about to become better. Welcome to Chapter 9, Neutralizing the Saboteur, where attention moves away from external circumstances and settles on a quieter force that operates within the nervous system. A force that does not oppose success openly, but interferes with it subtly, through hesitation, through distraction, through decisions that appear reasonable in the moment but reveal their pattern only after the fact. Understanding this force requires a shift in how it is perceived, because the saboteur is often mistaken for an enemy, something to be eliminated or suppressed, when in reality it behaves more like an outdated form of protection, a system designed to preserve safety based on past conditions, not current possibilities. And this distinction matters because what it protects is not your potential, but your familiarity. From its perspective, safety is not defined by what is good or fulfilling, but by what is known, what has been experienced repeatedly, what has become predictable, even if that predictability includes limitation, discomfort, or dissatisfaction. And this is why growth can trigger resistance, not because growth is harmful, but because it introduces unfamiliar territory. Success, in this framework, carries risk. Visibility increases, expectations change, outcomes become less certain. And so, at the edge of that shift, the system responds, not with a clear warning, but with subtle interference. A delay that feels justified, a distraction that feels necessary, a reaction that feels proportionate. All of them serving the same purpose, maintaining the previous range. A useful way to understand this is through the idea of an internal threshold, something like a range of experience that the system has learned to tolerate comfortably. Not necessarily because it is ideal, but because it is consistent. And when life begins to move beyond that range, even in positive ways, the system interprets the increase as instability rather than improvement. This creates a form of internal correction, an attempt to return to equilibrium. Not because higher states are impossible, but because they have not yet become familiar enough to feel safe. This is often described as an upper limit, a ceiling not imposed externally, but maintained internally. And when that ceiling is reached or slightly exceeded, a form of regulation begins, one that may look like coincidence, but operates with a clear pattern. A relationship that was flowing suddenly becomes tense. A financial gain is followed by an unexpected expense. A moment of clarity is interrupted by confusion. And each of these movements, taken alone, may seem unrelated, but together they form a recognizable cycle. Without awareness of this mechanism, it is easy to conclude that progress is temporary, that improvement cannot be sustained, that something always goes wrong. But the deeper reality is not about instability in the world, it is about tolerance within the system. The question then shifts, not how to achieve more, but how to remain within what has already been achieved without unconsciously stepping away from it. To approach that question, the saboteur must be seen not as a problem to be fought, but as a pattern to be updated. Because at its core, it operates based on outdated information, often formed early, when certain behaviors were necessary for safety or belonging. And those patterns, once established, continue to run even when the original conditions have changed. If visibility was once associated with criticism, then standing out may trigger discomfort. If success was once linked to isolation, then growth may feel like separation. If stability was once uncertain, then calm may feel unfamiliar. These associations are not logical in the present moment, but they are consistent with past experience, and so they remain active. Attempting to eliminate them through force often reinforces their presence because resistance confirms that something is wrong, that something must be controlled, and the system responds by tightening further. A more effective approach begins with separation. Not separation from the experience itself, but from identification with it. Instead of merging with every internal signal, a small distance is created. The difference between I am this and this is happening. That shift may appear minor, but it changes the structure of response. Because once the signal is observed rather than inhabited, it becomes possible to choose how to respond to it. An image can clarify this further. Picture a vehicle moving steadily along a road, with a passenger in the back seat reacting loudly to every turn, every change in speed, every unfamiliar stretch of road, interpreting each one as a potential threat. If the driver hands over control, the journey becomes unstable. If the driver argues constantly, the tension increases. But if the driver acknowledges the reaction and continues forward, maintaining direction without surrendering control, the influence of the passenger begins to diminish. The saboteur operates in a similar way. It produces signals, but it does not have to determine direction. There is also a deeper layer beneath these reactions, one that often remains unexamined because it touches something more sensitive. A form of loyalty, not conscious, not deliberate, but embedded in the emotional structure of belonging. Because historically, belonging has been tied to survival, and belonging often required similarity, sharing the same conditions, the same struggles, the same level of experience. When an individual begins to move beyond that shared level, even in positive ways, a subtle tension can arise, not only within themselves, but in how they imagine their connection to others. Growth can feel like distance. Success can feel like separation. Happiness can feel like divergence. And that tension can generate a form of self-correction, a pullback toward what feels collectively familiar, even if it is individually limiting. This is where self-sabotage becomes more than a habit. It becomes a form of alignment with an internalized group, and to move beyond it requires a redefinition. Expansion does not remove connection. It transforms it. Moving forward does not erase what came before. It extends it. This shift is not immediate, but once it begins, the internal conflict starts to loosen. Another pattern that often appears alongside this is the sense of unworthiness, a quiet doubt that questions whether what is arriving is justified, whether it will last, whether it has been earned properly. And this doubt often draws its strength from a learned association between value and struggle. If something comes easily, it is questioned. If something arrives quickly, it is discounted. But this association does not hold when examined more closely. Growth in nature does not follow that rule. A tree does not struggle to justify its height. A flower does not negotiate its ability to bloom. They expand because expansion is inherent. And in the same way, movement toward more within a human life does not require validation beyond its alignment with possibility. To resist that movement on the basis of unworthiness is not humility. It is hesitation shaped by conditioning. Recognizing that distinction begins to weaken the pattern. From there, awareness of signals becomes essential. Not to control every thought, but to notice recurring moments, especially at the edge of progress, where decisions begin to shift subtly, where hesitation appears without clear reason, where movement slows just before it would accelerate. In those moments, a simple question can create space, not as an instruction, but as a reflection. Is this movement expanding or contracting? And within that reflection, choice becomes available again. Action, even small action, begins to retrain the system. Each time movement continues despite hesitation, the internal threshold adjusts slightly. What was once unfamiliar becomes less so. What once triggered resistance becomes easier to hold. And over time, the range expands. Not through force, but through repetition. This is how stability forms. Not by avoiding the edge, but by remaining at it long enough for it to become the new center. As that happens, the role of the saboteur changes. It does not disappear entirely, but its influence weakens. From something that interrupts movement, it becomes something that signals adjustment, and when it no longer determines direction, progress no longer resets itself at the same point. It continues, which is what makes the next step possible, not only creating change, but allowing it to remain without being undone just as it begins to take form. Chapter 10. The Karmic Boomerang, right at the edge of completion, when everything seems finally understood and nothing feels hidden anymore. A quieter realization begins to surface, one that does not arrive as excitement, but as a kind of stillness. Because holding this knowledge is not the same as being ready to use it. And in that small gap between knowing and acting, something essential has to be seen clearly before it is too late to pretend you did not see it. What you carry now is not theory anymore. It is something closer to leverage, because you have already learned how to shift your internal state instead of reacting to the external one. How to stabilize a frequency long enough for reality to reorganize around it. How gratitude compresses what once felt delayed. How identity, repeated, embodied, reinforced, stops being imagination and becomes structure. And when all of this comes together, what remains in your hands feels almost like control. And that is exactly why it becomes dangerous. Because this kind of power does not discriminate. It does not pause to question your intention. It does not protect you from direction. It simply follows it, reflects it, multiplies it. Like a blade sharpened perfectly, it cuts cleanly in whatever direction it is moved, and the only thing it cannot do is decide where it should be aimed. Most people assume that once they understand these laws, they gain the ability to shape others, to influence outcomes externally, to bend situations in their favor without consequence. But that assumption only holds if reality behaves like a straight line, where cause travels outward and disappears into distance. What you're about to see is that it does not. It behaves like a loop, a closed field. A system does not allow anything to leave it without returning to its origin. This is the law of return, the karmic boomerang, not as a poetic idea, but as a structural property of the system you are inside. And once you see it clearly, it becomes difficult to misunderstand why everything you send out eventually finds its way back, often disguised as circumstance rather than intention. The confusion begins with something so familiar that it rarely gets questioned. Separation. Your senses insist that you are here and others are there, that your thoughts belong to you while your actions affect them, that what you generate internally travels outward and becomes someone else's experience once it leaves you. But beneath that surface, patterns reveal something different, something more continuous than divided, more interconnected than isolated. It begins to look less like separate individuals interacting, and more like different expressions moving within the same field, like waves appearing distinct while belonging to the same ocean, or like two hands acting independently while still belonging to the same body. And if that perspective holds even slightly, then the idea of sending something outward without it remaining within the same system begins to collapse. And once that collapses, the implications become immediate. There is no outside to send anything to, only a system that processes and returns. To make this unavoidable, imagine yourself standing at the exact center of a circular room whose walls are perfectly responsive, incapable of absorbing anything you throw, only capable of returning it with equal or greater force. And in your hand is a ball, which represents your intention, your emotional charge, your silent declaration toward the world. You throw it with frustration, perhaps with envy, perhaps with the quiet belief that someone else does not deserve what they have. And for a brief moment, it feels like release, as if something has left you and moved away. But the structure of the room does not allow escape. It only allows reflection. And what returns does not come back as the same thought. It returns as experience, as situations where you are judged, where you feel diminished, where what you were building slips through your hands without explanation. Nothing new was created. Something was returned. Now shift the same action, the same room, the same position, but a different internal state. You see someone succeed, and instead of tightening, something in you opens, not artificially, not forced, but as a quiet recognition that their success does not reduce yours. And you throw again, and again it returns. But this time what comes back feels different, as if resistance has thinned, as if opportunities appear without friction, as if alignment replaces effort. Not dramatic, but consistent. That consistency is the point. Because what appears as morality in language is simply mechanics and structure. In a closed system, direction is an illusion. Everything eventually returns to center. This is why manipulation becomes irrational once understood, because attempting to harm another within a unified system is no different than your right hand striking your left and believing it has gained something, while the entire body absorbs the damage, making victory impossible and loss inevitable. This pattern becomes even more visible in areas where desire intensifies perception, especially in love, where many attempt to direct a specific person toward a specific outcome, trying to influence their feelings, their choices, their presence, without recognizing that beneath that effort is often a signal of lack, a belief that something essential is missing without them, and that signal shapes everything that follows. Even when results appear to align, what returns is unstable because it was not created through alignment, but through pressure. And pressure always carries tension, fear, and the need to maintain control, turning what was desired into something fragile. The commander you encountered earlier does not operate from this space because the commander does not fixate on the person, but on the essence, defining the quality of the relationship rather than the identity attached to it, and allowing the system to respond without forcing a specific outcome into place. Revenge reveals the same structure even more clearly, because when harm is received, the impulse to return it feels justified, And with this knowledge, it may even feel possible to direct that return more precisely. But to project harm, you must first generate it, sustain it, embody it, and in doing so, you are not sending it outward. You are living inside it, like attempting to burn someone else while standing inside the fire you created. The damage begins with you, not as punishment, as exposure, because the system does not distinguish between sender and receiver. It only processes what is generated. This is why holding anger reshapes the one who carries it, why it lingers, why it spreads into areas of life that seem unrelated, because you become the environment you repeatedly generate, not the one you think you are directing outward. And from that recognition, something begins to shift. Letting go stops appearing weak. It begins to look precise. Because you are no longer trying to remove something from others, you are choosing not to inhabit it yourself. From there, behavior changes without force. Generosity stops feeling like loss. Recognition of others stops feeling threatening, and supporting growth, your own or someone else's, begins to feel aligned rather than sacrificial. Because in a system where everything returns, what you give does not disappear. It circulates and shapes what you will eventually experience. This is what could be understood as intelligent self-interest. Not selfishness in the conventional sense, but an awareness that what you generate defines what you later receive, making generosity not moral, but strategic. Still, there is one more layer of awareness that prevents unintended consequences, because what you think you want is limited by what you currently understand. And so instead of locking your intention into a fixed outcome, you allow space for adjustment, for expansion, for correction, through a simple clause, this or something better, in harmony for everyone, which keeps your intention open and prevents it from becoming a trap disguised as desire. And in the smallest, most ordinary moments, this law becomes visible in practice, when you move through the world and, without speaking, wish someone well, not as performance, not as obligation, but as a quiet internal act, because what changes first is not them, it is you, since everything you send passes through you before it reaches anything else. Which brings everything to a point that can no longer be avoided. Responsibility, not imposed, revealed. Because once you see the structure, the idea of randomness begins to fade, and what remains is clarity that you are not outside the system observing it. You are within it, at its center, generating what it will later return. And that leaves only one question, not whether this law exists, but what you will choose to send into it. A strange kind of stillness appears at the very end of a journey like this. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness that comes when too much has been placed into your hands for you to walk away unchanged, because you did not arrive here simply to be entertained. And you did not stay this long merely to collect clever ideas or feel briefly inspired before returning to the same patterns that brought you here. Something more serious has happened than that. You came in searching for relief, perhaps for a method, perhaps for a hidden switch that could repair what felt broken in your heart, your money, your confidence, or your direction. And step by step, the landscape changed. What looked at first like a collection of techniques slowly revealed itself as a structure, and what felt like information began turning into responsibility. Look at yourself honestly now. The person who began this audiobook a few hours ago is not standing here in exactly the same way. You entered like someone trying to navigate an invisible war without a map, reacting to symptoms, hoping for signs, exhausted by the feeling that life was happening around you faster than you could understand it. But now you leave with a very different kind of knowledge. You know the nature of your giant servant, the one introduced in the beginning, deaf to words, obedient to signal, exact in execution. You know how to set the frequency instead of begging from inside the old state. You know the commander's posture from Chapter 4. You know the poison of need from Chapter 5. You know the radical assumption of Chapter 6, the time trap of Chapter 7, the force of preventive gratitude from Chapter 8, and the inner saboteur of Chapter 9. You know enough now to stop calling your life random. And yet, one final piece remains. And without it, the whole structure can leak power, no matter how brilliant the rest of it is. Ancient schools of inner work, whether spoken of in Egypt, Greece, or later mystical traditions, often described 4 powers that belong to the true magician: to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. By now, the first three have already been placed before you. You know enough to act. You have learned how to shape will instead of scattering it. You have been asked to dare, not only in thought, but in identity, posture, and emotional courage. But the fourth power, the one most easily dismissed by modern culture, is the one that protects the other three. If you fail there, the whole structure weakens. If you fail to keep silence, the pressure escapes. If the pressure escapes, transformation slows. If transformation slows, the old world regains time to pull you back into itself. That is why this conclusion is not simply farewell. It is an initiation into the mastery of silence. To understand why silence matters, picture something very physical, something simple enough that no one argues with it. A pressure cooker. It cooks quickly, not because fire alone is enough, but because the vessel is sealed. Heat builds underneath, steam forms, pressure rises, and because that pressure is contained rather than released, the contents are transformed faster than they would be in an open pot. Your mind works in much the same way. Desire is the heat, emotion is the water, assumption is the sealed environment. When you feel intensely, I am already becoming, I am already moving toward it, it is already mine at the level of cause, pressure is created internally. That pressure is not a problem. It is exactly what is needed for the order to condense into form. But what happens if the seal is broken too early? The steam escapes with a hiss, the pressure drops, and what was cooking remains half done. Speaking too soon often does exactly that. Every time you rush to announce your coming success, your wealth, your reinvention, your spiritual authority, your future, or your secret, a portion of the inner charge is released through the mouth. The ego receives a quick satisfaction, a cheap chemical reward for having said it, a brief sense of importance for being the one with the big plan. And yet, metaphysically, something else has occurred. The contained force has leaked before it completed its work. This is why the true master often appears quieter than expected. Not weak, not uncertain, not secretive out of fear, but sealed, holding pressure, letting the thing cook. The less you speak about a deep creation before it takes form, the more internal force accumulates around it. Over time, this creates a quality people can feel without understanding. They look at you and sense that something is changing, even if you have said almost nothing. Your eyes carry more intensity. Your movements become cleaner. A field begins to gather around you. That field is the result of containment. It is pressure becoming presence. A second reason for silence is even more practical. Jesus, who throughout this book has been treated not as a mere religious symbol, but as a master of inner law, once said, "Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine." That line has been misunderstood as insult, when in fact it is deeply technical. Your new assumption, your new identity, your new signal, your new dream, these are pearls. They are still tender, still forming, still vulnerable to contamination. The people around you may love you and still vibrate at fear, scarcity, cynicism, or compulsive realism. If you place your tender new assumption in front of their unprocessed doubt, they may trample it without even intending cruelty. They may call it unrealistic. They may joke, question, warn, or shame. They may invite you back into the old emotional climate where everyone agrees not to try too much and not to rise too far. In that moment, the problem is not what they say. The problem is that your inner structure is still soft enough to absorb it. This is why vibratory protection matters. Do not expose the fragile sprout to acid rain just because the world rewards self-disclosure. Do not hand your unfinished cathedral to people who only know how to measure bricks. If you have no one around you who can hold your vision at equal or higher frequency, then let your own heart be your confidant and let the servant hear your order in silence. Results are the proper time for explanation. Once the thing is real, once the body is changed, the money is steady, the peace is visible, the atmosphere around you has become undeniable, then words are no longer naked. They are dressed in evidence. Until then, silence is not isolation. It is incubation. Neuroscience adds another layer to this. Studies on goal announcement have repeatedly suggested that when people publicly declare a significant intention, the brain often releases part of the reward chemistry associated with achievement before the work has been done. In ordinary language, the system starts confusing saying with doing. The ego tastes success before reality has earned it. This creates premature satisfaction, which weakens real momentum. The master understands this flaw and uses it wisely. He refuses the cheap dopamine of social validation. He stays hungry. He lets the energy travel from the tongue into the hands, the body, the schedule, the repetition, the world. What others leak through speech, he condenses into action. Silence does something else too, and you must be prepared for this. As your vibration rises, as your tolerance for clarity, peace, and responsibility deepens, many things in your current life may stop fitting. Conversations that once felt normal will begin to feel unbearable. Gossip will feel heavy. Complaint will sound like static. Some friendships may loosen. Some environments may no longer hold you. This can feel lonely at first, not because you are doing something wrong, but because resonance is changing. Old skin falls away before the new one feels natural. This is the solitude of awakening, and it should not frighten you. Do not run backward just to remain included in rooms you have outgrown. That in-between space is a decompression chamber. The universe is making room. The people who fed on complaint may leave and make space for those who build. The old romance may dissolve and make space for a clearer love. The crowd that once applauded your self-betrayal may pull away when you stop offering it. Let them. The lighthouse does not run along the shore begging ships to notice it. It stands still and shines. That is the correct image for this phase. Shine, and let those who can read that light find their way by it. Now picture something even more direct. The giant servant stands before you again, but the old notebook is closed. The pages of old victimhood, old fear, old repeated commands are finished. In front of him lies a new blank page, clean and waiting. He hands you the pen. The page is wide. There is no visible ceiling, no budget, no small print limiting what may be written, except the limits still living in your own belief. What are you going to inscribe there now? Remember, everything. Do not write with the trembling hand of the beggar from before. Write with the settled hand of the commander. Write with the assumption of chapter 6, with the gratitude of chapter 8, with the patience of chapter 7, with the freedom from need of chapter 5, with the clean ethics of chapter 10. Every thought becomes a brick. Every emotion becomes mortar. Every repeated state becomes architecture. This is not exaggeration. It is how form is built. Nothing is neutral anymore. No thought is cheap. No reaction is without consequence. You are either raising your cathedral or digging your grave. And the startling dignity of this truth is that the responsibility is total precisely because the freedom is real. So close your eyes for a moment and feel what is in your chest, not sentimentally, but as a fact. That beating power is not merely personal. It is the engine of life moving through a particular form called you. Breathe in the authority of that. Breathe in the quiet that follows genuine knowing. Then open your eyes and understand the simplest thing of all. The era of endless collecting is over. Stop consuming secret after secret, teacher after teacher, video after video, as if another layer of theory were going to save you from the necessity of practice. The next guru is not the answer. The next system is not the answer. The secret is no longer hidden from you. You are the secret. So let the book end here, and let your legend begin where silence starts. Turn off the noise. Enter the room. Summon the servant. Set the order. Then protect it with silence. Feed it with faith. Water it with gratitude. And let your life become so rich, so calm, so healthy, so clear, and so kind that people eventually come to you not because you advertised a philosophy, but because the evidence of your life became impossible to ignore. When they finally ask for the secret, you may smile and tell them only this: the universe began to obey me when I learned to obey the laws of love, order, and inner command. Until then, be still, be exact, be sealed. The world is your canvas now, and the servant is waiting for your next instruction. Make it a magnificent one. Make it so beautiful that even silence will glow around it. Make it a blessing large enough that the world itself is brighter for having passed through you. You are ready. You are the master of your own light. Thank you for listening. If this spoke to you, stay with Book Sounds Better You. The next video goes deeper.